last night why this race has been close and why I fear Donald Trump will be the next president of the United States unless things change.
The night. It's always darkest before the dawn. That's when hope rises.
President Biden attempting to squash any fears about his age in a new political ad for battleground states.
I know I'm not a young man, but I know how to do this job. When you get knocked down, you get back up.
Senator Rand Paul has been sounding the alarm on the president's mental acuity for months, and he joins us now. Senator, good morning. Great to see you. So just Team Biden's trying to argue that the president is fit for the job, that he may be older, but what we saw last Thursday night was not normal. Definitely not. What was your take on watching the president, given your observations over the past couple of months?
You know, my concern is that weakness invites tragedy. You know, with the evacuation in Afghanistan, and this is, a year or two ago now, the weakness of it, retreating from a commercial airport instead of retreating if we were going to leave from the Air Force Base at Bagram, which would have been a much more sound military strategy. In that weakness, 13 soldiers died. But then the reaction also comes from a point of weakness and perhaps related to senility, is that he overreacts. And so he says, well, we must do something, and I must show that I'm not weak. And so there's an overreaction, and they killed an aid worker and several children with a drone because we must do something. The world thinks I'm weak. Americans think I'm weak. They think I'm ineffectual, so I have to do more. So really the problem with weakness often isn't inaction, it's overaction and response. But it also sends a signal to the world that America doesn't know what it's doing. Mm-hmm. And, we saw the warnings from Khomeini recently from the Ayatollah saying something's going to happen somewhere around the world at one of your bases. And I take that at face value, and I think we have to be prepared. But I think we have to be cognizant that weakness leads to overreaction, could lead to something much worse. Yeah, the country is facing big issues, big threats. The New York Times puts it this way. They said the image of the nation has become some combination of unhinged and doddering, especially striking at a time when the U.S. is supposed to be leading the fight against a rising alliance of autocracies that includes China, Russia, and Iran. Also, of course, Senator, over the weekend, the U.S. military was warned in Europe that a credible intel threat for a terrorist attack was in place over the next week or so. So while back home we're having this debate about Joe Biden's mental acuity and, trying to debunk these lies from the White House about whether he actually is having these problems or not, the rest of the world is watching, and the adversaries, as you say, are taking advantage of that weakness. Well, and I think that you can see in contrast Donald Trump. Donald Trump, probably like very few other leaders, projects strength. He sometimes is bombastic, but nobody believes that he will sit idly by. But interestingly, and I've been around him when we were attacked, we had a drone shot down by the Iranians, and around him were many other people like, we've got to do something. We must bomb Tehran. We must invade Iran. And his response was much more reasoned, but his response was also such that he cared about every soldier, and he knew for every reaction there'd be a reaction, and that he was concerned, how many Iranian soldiers will we kill? How many will they come back and kill? And it was a very thoughtful process, much more so than I think people give Donald Trump credit for. But I think by projecting strength, you're allowed to have a more measured response. If you project weakness, like Biden does, then you become hysterical that I must do something. I must do something. We must attack. We must invade, because otherwise I will look weak. Right. So I think if you can project strength like Donald Trump does, it may actually save us and prevent us from entering into war needlessly.
Yeah, panic never gives us good results in terms of policy, whether it's domestic or foreign policy. Senator, you've been a supporter of President Trump. The RNC convention is in about 2 weeks' time in Milwaukee. Are you going to give him your full endorsement?
You know, I have told them I'm persuadable, but I'm going to need a little bit more of a conversation. If they're willing to have the conversation, I'm open to the discussion.
On what issue specifically?
Well, the debt. I mean, there was about $8 trillion worth of debt added under the Trump administration. There will be about $8 trillion added under the Biden administration. I'm a deficit hawk. I ran for Congress because we have so much debt added. And so we have to do a better job on draining the swamp. The FDA under Trump with Scott Gottlieb, he went right out the revolving door back over to Pfizer, right, and then began suppressing speech on Twitter. So there are some things I would like help with the COVID investigation. And if Donald Trump is willing to say, when I am elected, I'm going to release all of the information for the presidency for my investigation, that would go a long way towards getting me.
Okay, well, if you decide to do the endorsement, please come back and let us know. Senator Rand Paul, thanks for your time this morning.
Thank you.
I'm Steve Doocy.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.
It's been said that, you are either going to take away votes from Trump or going to take away votes from President Biden. So should they be scared of Robert Kennedy at this moment?
Yeah, my plan is to take away votes from both of them and win the election. About 57% of my followers say that if I left the race, they would vote for President Trump. I think that the Democrats made a very bad mistake of closing out the primaries so other people couldn't run, so Americans didn't have choice. And, their solution now, they have a candidate who can't win, and their solution is to try to get his opponents off the ballot and keeping opponents out of the debate. But, our numbers are climbing, and I'm very hopeful that they will continue to climb through November.
What is that day one, week one, month one action that you're going to take when you step into office, Bobby?
What I'm going to do when I get in there is I'm going to take that $42 billion budget from NIH, and I'm going to say that's given to 56,000 scientists around the world to do research, to research disease and drugs, et cetera. And I'm going to say to them, we're going to figure out what's making our kids the sickest kids in the world. And you can say to me, well, even if you figure out that high fructose corn syrup or glyphosate is causing the obesity epidemic, there's nothing you can do because these industries are so powerful. They've infiltrated Congress, they've infiltrated the agencies, they own everything, and they have 1 million farmers who are trapped now in that paradigm. So how can you ever dismantle that? I'll tell you how. You put enough science out there that the lawyers can step in and sue these companies. Siri is not working for you. Alexa is not working for you. They're working for Bill Gates and the NSA. So it's more important than ever that we have a deep commitment to our constitutional rights in this country, because the capacity of the government to enslave us is like nothing before. They have technology that can look through walls. You can't hide in your house anymore. And this is the time we need to be raising the barrier of our constitutional rights and imbuing the generation of Americans that nobody is allowed to touch these. And what I recognized during COVID when I was fighting these incursions, they gave us back a lot of these rights. But once the government sets the precedent that they're allowed to take them away, that right is much weaker than ever before. So now they can take them away if they're for any crisis, for war, for financial crisis. They have an endless pipeline of new epidemics that they can use as justification, and our rights are going to mean nothing. The only way those rights are going to exist is just a piece of paper unless we all believe in them, unless we're all committed to them.
Everybody
everybody's concerned about the future of the country at this point, right? And who is the best person to lead us? When you look at President Biden right now, do you think that it is unsafe for the country for him to be able to finish his term?
You know, I think the country is in a more dangerous, precarious position than at any time since the Cuban Missile Crisis. We are, you know, we just authorized the bombing with cluster bombs, which is a war crime, of civilians on a beach in Crimea, and the U.S. is, you know, participated in that missile attack, and the Russians are actively and openly threatening to use nuclear weapons in this war, and the Russians have better nuclear weapons than us. They have more. They have 1,000 to 1,500 more. Right. We don't have the capacity at this time in our history to ramp up to fight that kind of war because we've given away our industrial base to China. You know, we had the industrial base in the 1930s, and we could gear it up and produce material for the war. Today, the Chinese own that base, and we can't build anything in this country anymore. So, we still are in the mindset that we dominate the globe, but, you know, it all depends on the industrial base. You cannot dominate the globe like we're pretending to do, like President Biden thinks that he's doing. Okay. I think it's delusion, and I think we need a president who's actually looking at reality and is trying to adjust our reality to the facts. I'd like to share some of my reflections about the 4th of July with you today. I'm Robert F. Kennedy Jr., independent candidate for President of the United States. The last sentence of the Declaration of Independence reads, "And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor." The 56 men who signed that document knew that if they failed, they would be condemned as traitors to the British Empire. This is why Ben Franklin famously remarked, "We must all hang together or we will all hang separately." The odds were decidedly against the cause of the American Revolution. The idea that these ragtag group of colonists could create their own nation, could challenge the greatest empire in the history of mankind, could create an experiment in self-governance was so far-fetched that most of the world just thought it was fantastical. Yet the cause of freedom triumphed over the forces of monarchy and arbitrary rule. This is the total commitment that I now bring to my own race for the presidency. I became an adult with the words of my uncle, President Kennedy, echoing in my thoughts. We pledge our word
that one form of colonial control shall not have passed away, merely to be replaced by a far more iron tyranny.
Our opponents represent the forces of censorship, of economic oppression, of imperialism, of endless wars and surveillance. The election is only a few months away. God bless you, and God bless America. Okay, you could constitutionally give people reparations for slavery. And, the case probably the strongest case for that is the reparations that were given to Japanese whose property was stripped from them during World War II. The legacy of people who can show their slaves that you could technically bring a case and on that issue.
So those are Americans.
Right, and that constitutionally it would be permissible. But then you would have to get Congress to appropriate that money. And my own experiences I just related to you with the black farmers is even when it is a specific, quantified, with a jury trial, giving an award for specific money that was stolen, even then, a direct, provable injustice to specific people, even then Congress won't appropriate the money. You can do that heavy lift. Somebody could bring that lawsuit. It wouldn't be the president. It would be somebody bringing that lawsuit. And then the president could say, here's a bill, and I'm going to put out and make sure that that judgment gets paid. And you would have to get it through Congress. And I'm telling you that I
I don't believe that that is going to happen. We can't even get Congress to appropriate the money for those farmers, those specific individuals, not to their ancestry, but to them in particular. And Congress still won't do it. So what I'm trying to do, and I do this not with every community. I don't tell people things that they want to hear. I tell people things that I know that I can do without Congress. So I have a program, which is a program which we call Targeted Community Repair, where I am going to funnel and incentivize the transfers of capital to these communities so that they can rebuild themselves. I watched your show with President Trump. It was really good. The best I've ever seen him presenting himself. I think you brought out the best in him.
That was my plan.
On the off chance that you're not elected in November, and that Donald Trump is elected, would you be willing to work for him in some capacity to do what you're talking about?
I don't think so. I mean, I would listen to a proposal, but I don't think so. I don't think.
You wouldn't serve your country?
Well, I'm not confident that I could do that. If I had that confidence, I would. I think. I don't think. Anyway.
What you've been talking about. I mean, the backstory, because we don't have the time, but we're talking about America. And when I interviewed your cousin, Caroline Kennedy, at one point we were talking about how your uncle, Teddy, would exhort you cousins to memorize Longfellow's poem, Paul Revere's Ride. And it reminded me of a different America, because when people talk about, say, I'm a Kennedy Democrat, that's pretty dramatically different than what the party has become. There was a love of country, and I think that when you talk about your uncle's desire, your father's desire to right these wrongs, there's something noble about that, and it's hard not to admire that. And to think that we're 6 decades along and that we're still dealing with this stuff. Most Americans still aren't awake to the narrative. I mean, you're giving us chapter and verse on where the bullets were, and most Americans think, oh, Sirhan, Lee Harvey, and again, not that that's the most important thing, but it points to the deeper truth that we're supposed to be a self-governing people, and it seems that some of the forces that you've been working against have been. They're taking great pains to demonize anybody like you that would question the narrative, and so it seems to me that you have to have hope that people are waking up. I mean, did the 51 people who signed that document denouncing the Hunter Biden laptop as Russian disinformation? I mean, I think that there are many Americans that are aware that something very nasty is going on, that we've got to do something about it. And I just think that whether you are in the White House or outside of the White House, that you're uniquely appointed to be working for this. So I'd like to think that America would mean enough to you that.
I would, first of all.
And by the way, if Biden should win, I don't think you're getting a call from him, by the way.
Yeah. No, I'm not. But I do want to just emphasize what you just said about those people here may not know what you're talking about. I think most of them do, but there were 51 high-level acting or inactive CIA officials who signed a letter saying that the Hunter Biden laptop was Russian disinformation, which was a lie. It was tampering with the U.S. election, what they were doing. And it was the CIA tampering with the U.S. election. And the fact that, I'm not a fan of Donald Trump's, and one of the reasons that I don't think I'd go to work for him is because he offered me a job in the last administration, and then he took $1 million from Pfizer, and then...
I've heard that story, and I think a lot of us were in a different place at that time. A lot of us have a very different view of Pfizer and Moderna than we did at that point, and actually a very different view of many things than we did at that point.
When somebody looks you in the eye and tells you, I want you to do this, and then, it was a big cost for me to go announce that I'm joining the Trump administration, an enormous cost. And then, and then nothing is there. It makes you less willing to, then entrust to trust that person again. So, like I said, I would listen to a proposal. My objective is to help my country. Yeah, I was never an atheist, ever. But I was raised in a deeply religious family, and I integrated that. We went to church twice a day. We said the rosary at least once a day, at least. We prayed before and after meals. We read the lives of the saints or the Bible every night. Oh, and it wasn't just my 11 siblings and parents, all 29 of the cousins were raised the same way, and we would all see each other at church every morning, etc. So it was a really important part of my life. But when my dad was killed when I was 14. I became a heroin addict when I was 15, but I was always fighting my addiction. I was taking heroin without my own permission, and I was doing that for a lot of years. And when you're doing that, when you're living against conscience, which is what happens when you're an addict, you tend to push any kind of notion of God over the periphery of your horizon. So, God had become a very, very small thing in my life. And then I had this, I was struggling. By the way, I had very iron willpower always from when I was a kid, and very good discipline. I gave up candy for Lent when I was 13. I never ate candy again until I was in college. And I gave up desserts for Lent when I was 14. I never had another dessert till I was in college, and I was bulking up for sport, for rugby. And I felt I could do anything with my willpower, but this compulsion, the drug compulsion, was just impervious to it, and it was cunning, baffling, and demoralizing. And to me, the most demoralizing feature of addiction was my incapacity to keep contracts with myself. I would tell myself at 9 o'clock in the morning, I'm never going to do that again, and at 4 o'clock, I'd be doing it. And it was baffling to me that I could not bind that person who I was going to be later on in the day to do anything. And I knew when I got sober that I had to change in a deep, fundamental way who I was. And because I didn't want to be an addict, but just be white-knuckling it and be miserable all the time and wanting the drug. And I wanted to be just wake up and not want any drugs. And I knew that was going to require a spiritual awakening. I knew from reading the lives of the saints that there had been people who had been living in all kinds of depravity. St. Augustine was one, St. Francis another, who had these spiritual awakenings and just walked away from addiction. And I had a friend who was a friend of my little brother who died of this disease, David, who was a year difference than me. And he took heroin the same way I did, with the same enthusiasm and compulsion. He became a Mooney. He joined the Unification Church and became a follower of Reverend Sun Myung Moon. And he didn't want to take drugs anymore. And he used to still hang out with us, and we would take drugs right in front of him, but he was zero interest. He was completely indifferent to him. And he would chatter about all of his stuff from the Unification Church. And when I got sober in September of '83, I would think about this guy all the time, and I'd think, I'd rather be dead than be a Mooney. That's what I was thinking at that time. But I wish somehow I could distill whatever it was he had that made him, impervious to this compulsion without becoming a religious nuisance. And at that time, I read a book by Carl Jung called Synchronicity, and the short story is that in that book, he tries to use empirical tools and scientific tools to prove the existence of a God, and he fails. But he says in that book that although he can't scientifically prove the existence of a God, he could prove that he ran the biggest sanitarium in Europe in Zurich, and he said he could prove, having seen tens of thousands of patients come through his facility, that people who believed in God got better faster than people who didn't, and that their recovery was more durable. And for me, that was a more impactful thing than if he had said that he had proved the existence of a God, which I wouldn't have believed. But what he was saying was that it's irrelevant if there's a God up there. If you believe in one, your chances of staying sober are much better. And I'd already made a commitment to myself that I'd do whatever I needed to do to improve my chances of staying sober by even 1%. So I made a decision, just an intellectual decision. I'm going to start believing in God and recover what I had lost. And then I was presented with the dilemma that anybody who's in that position would face, which is, how do you start believing in something that you can't see or smell or touch or taste or hear or acquire with your senses? And Jung solves that problem. He says, you fake it till you make it. He said, act as if. And he said, the obedience will precede the evidence. In other words, if you start doing what you're supposed to do, that you will then see an evidence of tangible, undeniable evidence of God's presence in your life. And so I started doing that. I just said, oh, that's what I'm going to do. And I just started pretending that, that there was a God up there watching me all the time, and that everything I did in life was a test. And that, I began breaking my day down into about 40 different decisions. And each of those decisions now, for me, had a moral implication. When the alarm goes off in the morning, do I get immediately out of bed, or do I stay in bed for an extra 20 minutes with my indolent thoughts? Do I make the bed? Most important thing I do during the decision I do every day. Do I hang up the towels, after I use them? When I reach into the closet and pull out a pair of blue jeans and all those little wire hangers fall on the ground, do I shut the door like I used to and say, I'm too much of a big shot, that's somebody else's job? Or do I go in there and clean up my own mess? Do I put the water back in the ice tray before I put the ice tray in the freezer? Do I put the shopping cart where it's supposed to go? And I had this experience when I first got sober. When you're an addict, your life gets very small. But as soon as I got sober, my life started to enlarge dramatically. And I was running about 2 months after, into it. I was running through National Airport in Washington, D.C., and I was late for a plane, and it was mission critical. It was going to be the apocalypse, and I didn't catch that plane. And I was certainly going to miss, almost certainly to miss it. And as I ran, I was putting a stick of Dentyne in my mouth, and I wrapped up the little wrapper into a ball, and I threw the wrapper, and it made a perfect arch as I was running into the center of a garbage can. And swish right in. But as I was running by it, I saw out of the corner of my eye, it must have hit something in there because it jumped back out. And I was like, well, that's God's problem because I made the shot. But I got about 40 feet from that trash can. It just started eating at me. And finally, I put on the brakes, and I went back, and I threw it in the garbage can. And for me, that's probably the most important thing I did that day, because the big challenge in after you have a spiritual awakening, you can't live off the laurels of a spiritual awakening. You have to, and I had a spiritual awakening that just abolished my desire for drugs and alcohol. But you can't live off the laurels. You have to renew it every day. You have to renew it to display service to others, and you have to renew it by staying in that posture of surrender. I came in a total surrender, my life gone, and was willing at that point to turn my life over to God. But then when the cash and prizes start flowing back in, you're like, thanks God, I got it from here. And then, you take the wheel and drive the car off the cliff again, and then you have to come in on your knees. And the big trick is, how do you stay in that posture of surrender even when your life is filling with abundance, And so.
Are you still pretending that God exists?
Yeah, I don't pretend anymore because Jung says in his book, Jung never had any doubt of God. Jung saw God everywhere and with such clarity and with such texture and grace and joy and just material existence. He didn't even understand what it was like to not have faith. His father had been a preacher, but a dry preacher. His father had been a very important preacher, but he never believed it. He was very good at sort of reciting the conventional shibboleths, but he never had an authentic religious experience. And Jung had those experiences from when he was 3 years old. His biography is just riveting, which is called Memories, Dreams, and Something Remembrances. But he wrote it when he was 86 years old. And his recitation of these experiences that he had from when he was a kid are fascinating. And, he was, Freud was his mentor. And Freud was a total atheist. And they did a tour of America together by train. It's a fascinating book because they ended up splitting on that issue. And Freud really made himself irrelevant, whereas Jung today is, everywhere. Because his approach to healing was all about kind of spiritual connections.
It's very frustrating that we're more than out of time, but I'd like to think that this might be the first of a number of conversations. It's been a privilege. Thank you, Robert F. Kennedy, Jr.
Thank you.
Really great. Thank you.
Here we go.
Hello, everybody.
Hello, Mr. President.
Great time. I love that house he has. I love David's house. What a house. That made the biggest impression, huh?
Thank you, sir. I heard you have a pretty nice house, too.
Yeah, I have. We're in a nice house. We like
Although
houses.
it's only worth $18 million, right?
We're like, I know, the judge said 18 million. People said Palm Beach has gone down a long way. Hello, everybody.
Let your winners ride.
Rain Man David Sack.
And instead, we open source it to the fans, and they've just gone crazy with it.
Love you, West Queen of Quinoa.
Thanks so much for sitting down with us, Mr. President. The All-In Pod's basically the four of us having conversations. It's kind of a spectrum of different views. We got it's sort of like a little bit of some Fox News and then some MSDNC at the same time.
Well, that's okay. Keeps it interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyway, Chamath and I, we had a great time at the fundraiser that we did a couple weeks ago. I think it turned out great. And I heard the Winklevoss brothers are actually announcing that they're donating $1 million each in Bitcoin to you tomorrow. So I think that's a great result to come out of it as well.
Yeah, got to meet them for the first time at your house, and terrific. They did well. They might have started the whole thing. I don't know. I don't know if that court case was proper, but they were very nice, both of them.
Absolutely.
Really nice guys.
And I think maybe this is a good place to start in our conversation is, one of the things I think we heard a lot at that dinner was just the difficulty that people in business were having under this Biden administration. You got the crypto guys who just want a framework. They just want the government to tell them how to operate, and they can't get that. You got no M&A happening right now in tech. The real estate guys, they can't get loans because the interest rates are through the roof and there's a credit crunch. So I think one of the common themes we just heard across that dinner was that it was just so hard to do business right now. And I guess maybe a good place to start would just be, what's the number one thing, or maybe the top 3 things that you would do to kind of get things moving again, if you're reelected?
So I'd say regulation, and taxes. Okay? I gave the biggest tax cut in the history of our country, and a lot to business. It took them down from, look, as you know, they were paying companies were paying 40%, 45%, including state and city taxes in many cases. And we got it down to 21%. We'd like to get it down lower, actually, but we got it down. And the revenues were better than ever, even with the lower rate. We had a record revenues, which tells you a little bit about that. But also the regulations. And when I asked a lot of people, a lot of big people, a lot of corporate types, big corporate types, I said, if you had your choice between just the taxes or just the regulations, where did I do better? He said the regulations. I was the biggest cutter of in 4 years. I cut more regulations than anybody by far, not even close. And when I spoke to different people about the regulation versus the taxes, I don't think I've ever had anybody say, and the taxes were a massive cut, from 37, 38%, if you look at it just there, to 21%. I don't think I ever had anybody say that the taxes were more important than the regulation cuts. I made it possible to build. I made it possible to do things, to invest. I was able to get companies with a lot of money outside of the USA to bring that money back in. We cut the rate, and it was crazy. The rate was like 55%. So that means if they bring the money back, they lose half their money before they even start. But it was also impossible from a standpoint, a structural standpoint, a legal standpoint. It was very hard. And they were able to bring back, Apple's an example. They brought hundreds of billions of dollars back from other countries into the United States and invested it here. So, but it's very interesting because I ask the question all the time, which was more important? And almost everybody said I did an even better job. And I got the biggest tax cuts. The biggest tax cuts, bigger than the Reagan tax cuts, but they found regulations, and the regulation cuts were even more effective. And that's where we had the great economy, and that's where we had the most jobs ever produced.
So there's this odd thing that happens in certain states where taxes keep going up, and then you start to see the states break, right? Productivity breaks, crime goes up, and quality of life goes down. But then people don't understand that taxation and all of those things are correlated. Do you have an idea of why that is? Like, why don't people understand universally that lower taxation is better for productivity?
Well, they don't understand it, and it's such an interesting question because you look at some of these places like Chicago and New York and LA and so many more. I'd hate to even mention the 3 because there are worse examples than that. You look at what's happened in Oakland, and you look at what's happened into some cities that are disappearing. They're literally just crime waves. Nobody lives there except for criminals because you can't live there. You can't survive there. Physically, you can't survive there. And when you look at the kind of crime that we're talking about, and then they take the power away from the police can't do anything. If they do anything to stop it, they end up losing their pension, their house, their family. They end up losing everything. They get put in jail. And we're not talking about the rogue cops who do something really bad and should be taken care of badly. Be nasty. You got to be nasty to them also. But mostly, these people, they want to really, like 99%, they want to stop crime. They hate to see it. They're not allowed to they're told not to do anything. When you see a department store that was so proud, they opened up a new store in a certain city, and all of a sudden, over the last couple of years has happened, this phenomena where 500 usually young people walk into the store and take everything. They have masks on. They walk out with television sets, air conditioners. They walk out with everything. This is a new phenomena that's taken place, and it's incredible. Look at drugstores. Look at what's going on. Like in New York, you walk into a chain. I've seen it twice. I don't walk into too many drugstores, but I used to love it. I used to love to walk around and just look at what it is, whether it's a drugstore or a department store. But they told me just a little while ago, I had a meeting with some people, and they say you walk into a drugstore in New York, and everything's covered up with bars and glass. And if you want just a little thing of aspirin, or if you want to buy a toothbrush, you have to wait a half an hour to get a clerk, and they open up this vault, and they give you a toothbrush, or they give you... How do you do business like that? This is a phenomenon. There's never been anything like this. They didn't used to have theft of of even the most minor items. They had very little theft, relatively speaking. They didn't have theft, but they had the police would arrest them if they did something. Today, they don't. They have limits sometimes. If you steal less than $2,000, you don't get arrested. So nobody steals more than $2,000. It's incredible when you see what's happened to the quality of life in our country. And it's happened so quickly. It's taken place so rapidly. Nobody's ever seen anything. But you look at retail, and I know the big deal. It used to be a big deal when a department store moved into a city, or a certain store opened up even in a town. But it's usually the Democrat-run big cities where this problem is taking place. And I don't say that as a Republican. I just say you look at the 25 cities, the top problems, they're just about all Democrat. They're Democrat-run.
And they're also high tax, high regulation states.
Yeah, no cash bail, all of these different things that have taken place. They're phenomena. It's a phenomena. What's going on? Nobody's ever seen anything like it. And it has to be stopped. It's a horrible quality of life. And on top of that, you can't walk to a store. You end up getting shot or mugged or something. The level of crime in the cities, in these big cities, is out of control. Nobody has ever seen anything like it.
Mr. President, can I just ask, on your point about the tax cuts, Larry Summers made a comment the other day, and I thought maybe you could respond to his tweet that the tax cuts coupled with the tariffs that you've proposed would cause a massive, I think he called it the mother of all stagflation, where you would have kind of inflation because of the tariffs, you would have economic decline because more money would start to fund an increase in prices with tax coming down, tax cuts being put in place. Can you maybe just comment on the comment made by Larry Summers and how we implement tax cuts without inflation?
Well, let me say that I respect Larry Summers a lot. He's been right about a lot of things, and Obama and Biden have been wrong. Certain things that he said turned out to be true, certain things. And I do have a good respect for him. He's a different kind of a guy, and he speaks his mind. I happen to be a big believer in tariffs because I think tariffs give you two things. They give you economic gain, but they also give you political gain. If a country is out of control on something having nothing to do with economics or having nothing to do with money coming in or money going out, but other things that are very political, because there are a lot of other things involved in countries, you have tremendous power over a country. Now, not everybody can say that, but we can because we're the big piggy bank. But our piggy bank is going to get smaller and smaller all the time because we're losing power. We're losing a lot of countries on the dollar. I mean, they're going like flies. If we ever lose that, that's the equivalent of losing a war. That would be unbelievable. That would really make us third world. We have lost so many countries. I looked the other day. So Russia's gone. You take a look. Ukraine doesn't sort of exist in a sense. Nobody knows what's going on there. But when you look at China is essentially gone. They're trying to get out of it. They're a primary competitor. Iran is not there. The other day I read where Saudi Arabia is willing to now go in various different currencies instead of the dollar. This is a tragedy. This is a big thing that's happening against our country, and we cannot let that happen. With tariffs, it gives you a tremendous power, as an example, not to let that happen. You say, you want to do that? We're going to put tariffs on your product coming into the United States. But more importantly, and that's a big importance, but probably of more importance is they tax us, we tax them, reciprocal trade. I think we should have a reciprocal trade act. If China's going to charge us $100 tariff or 100% tariff on a car, then we should say, you got to pay 100% to us. I put on a large tariff on China cars coming in, and it had a huge impact, a huge positive impact. And Biden only is doing the electric cars. I don't know why that is, because the electric cars, they're going to end up all being made in China, by the way. They're not going to be made here. The United Auto Workers are going to take a blow like no unions have. Between that and people coming in, pouring into our country, unions are getting absolutely decimated. Absolutely.
President Trump.
But the reciprocal act is, I think, a very important thing when these countries, and I don't mean just China, we have other countries. You could take the European Union. They don't want our farm product, and they don't want our cars, and they don't want anything. We have a massive deficit right there. But you could go with many countries, and they essentially do things to us, and we should do things to them. Basically, it should be reciprocal.
One of the things we've talked about, President Trump, on this podcast a lot is the deficit. Under your administration, we added close to $8 trillion Under Biden, it's going to be paradoxically about the same number. Seems incredibly unpopular in Washington to cut costs, but that's something we're going to need to do. What's your plan? And it looks like you're going to win a second term here. What's your plan in your second term to control spending? Can you get it under control? Is there the will in Washington to allow you to do that?
Well, the biggest thing I think is growth, because we can grow our way out. As an example, we have more liquid gold under our feet. I use the term. We have more oil. We have more wells. We have more everything than anybody else. When I started, we were number 3. Now we're number 1. We were number 1. He's going to keep it that way until after the election. If they ever won the election, there's no more oil coming out. There's no more oil. They were going down. Oil is what caused the inflation. You'd have nothing coming out. It would be a disaster. So they were intelligent enough to let the oil wells continue to go. They're not happy about it. But if this election were won by them, I can tell you right now, we would see oil go through the roof because they would really close it up. Already they're taken out of the strategic reserves just for politics because they want to try and keep the prices down as low as possible. But the big thing, we have tremendous growth potential and we have tremendous numbers of dollars that can be saved through efficiency. The way we're spending money, hundreds of billions of dollars, what Biden did with the trillions of dollars that he borrowed for COVID. Now, I had a different situation. We were getting ready to start paying off debt. We were getting ready to make a lot. We had the greatest economy in history. I had to throw a lot of money at COVID in order that we didn't end up in a 1929 type depression, which we could still end up in now because of what they've done. But I threw a lot of money in, and we ended up not in a depression. And then we ended up with a very strong, I ended up with a higher stock market than it was just previous to COVID coming in, which was pretty much of a miracle, according to most. But we had to throw money out there in order to keep our country going. We would have ended up, if I didn't do that, we would have ended up in a depression. The problem is, when Biden came in, he took trillions and trillions of dollars for COVID. He didn't use it for COVID. He used it for other things. But he took trillions of dollars out, and that caused a lot of the inflation. His energy policies caused inflation, and his spending, the unbelievable spending that they did caused inflation, tremendous inflation, and it's going to have an impact for a long time to come.
Can you talk about your impoundment authority intention? You mentioned that in the past, that you could go in and reduce the bureaucracy and the spend. I always tell people my position going into the election is less that I'm interested in knowing what the government's going to do for me, and I'm more interested in knowing what the government's going to stop doing that doesn't do any good for anyone. And there seems to be a lot of that. And I'm really curious to hear, sir, how you think about using the impoundment authority vested in you as the president of the United States to reduce some of the bureaucracy, wasteful spending, and create accountability. And is there a team that you've built around you to help build a specific plan on backing out of some of these issues?
Right. We have a lot of money floating around that should be brought back into the government, should be given back to D.C., to Washington. As you know, there was a lot of money given out over the last couple of years, especially my money was given out to help us with COVID. Then they took money and they have no idea what they're even doing with it. That money can be given back, and it should be given back, and things can be done with that money that are positive. But there are many, many things. I'll give you an example. Education. We spend more on education per pupil than any other country. We spend numbers and yet we're terrible at it. We're down at the bottom of the list, and yet we're at the top of the list. I am going to, very early in the administration, we're going to send education back to the states. We're going to give them approximately half the number of dollars, and they're going to have so much money that like they've never had before, because they can spend a fraction of what we're spending right now and have much better school systems. As an example, you could name many. You go to Nebraska, you go to Iowa, you go to many states. We'll do a far better job than we're doing right now, and they'll do it for a fraction of the cost. We'll save a tremendous amount of money and have better. Some states, I don't believe will do a very good job, but they're going to have to learn to. But we have, I would say most of our states will do a much better job. I think all of them will do better than, you can't do worse than what we're doing right now, but all of them will do better. But some will be absolutely education, a factory in a positive sense, factories. We are going to close up education. We'll have a tiny little group to make sure everyone's teaching at least English and perhaps proper math, et cetera, but very little. Department of Education goes, and education goes back to the states and where it belongs. I mean, where it absolutely belongs. And you're going to save a lot of money. You can look at interior with that. You can look at environmental with a lot of that, where the environment can be controlled by the states instead of this big bureaucracy in Washington, D.C. I mean, what do you do when China is burning all the coal and they're sending the ashes over the United States? Because that's what happens. It takes 3.5 days and it blows over the United States. In the meantime, we're keeping things good. We produce clean coal. We're going to produce clean energy, but we have to get back to energy. We're spending trillions of dollars on artificial, weak energy that's not going to fire up our plants. Our plants have to be fired up. We have a phenomena coming up right now, and I was talking about it the other day to David, and that's AI, little things, simple, two little simple letters, but it's big. And I realized the other day, more than anything, when we were at David's house and talking to a lot of geniuses from Silicon Valley and other places, they need electricity at levels that nobody's ever experienced before to be successful, to be a leader in AI. The amount of electricity they need is like double what we have right now and even triple what we have right now. It's incredible how much they need to be the leader. And we're going to have to be able to do that. And a windmill turning with its blade, knocking out the birds and everything else is not going to be able to make us competitive. You'll have China.
What about nuclear, Mr. President? Yeah. So let me just give you a statistic on this.
Nuclear is
China's
okay.
building 150 nuclear reactors, and they're only spending about $2,500 a kilowatt. In the U.S., we're not building any, and our cost to build them is about $10,000 a kilowatt. And China's about to build as much capacity as 20% of the total U.S. production in nuclear. We clearly have a problem here in nuclear.
We do, and nuclear is okay with me. And what we're doing is, if you look at Alabama, you look at a couple of states where they built these plants and they had cost overruns that nobody's ever seen anything like it, where they're costing $25 billion to build a plant. There were a couple of them built in the South. I won't mention the places, but you know the places. And they came out at numbers that I think the most expensive things ever built in our country. And the inspectors would go in, they say, those walls aren't thick enough, knock them down and build another wall. And, the environmental people were brutal. In France and in other places where they do have a lot of nuclear, they build small plants all the same. And if they need double the amount, they'll build two of them, as opposed to the nonsense that we've done where we build these massive plants and they never get built and they have cost overruns of 300, 400, 500%. Nobody's ever seen anything like it. No, I'm okay with nuclear, but you have to do it in a way that makes sense. And they have nuclear applications today that can be built and can be built reasonably inexpensively. But nuclear certainly is very strong power.
Can I shift the conversation to foreign policy just for a minute, just to make sure we get time to talk about foreign policy? Is that okay with you guys?
Yes.
Mr. President, I've really appreciated your comments saying that you want to bring a peace deal to the war in Ukraine so that people stop dying. And I wholeheartedly agree with that sentiment. But I've seen that Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, is talking about actually putting NATO troops or French troops in Ukraine as potentially a next step, and that could be a tripwire for more NATO troops coming in. Can you guarantee that no matter what, you're not going to put American boots on the ground in Ukraine? Is that something you can say definitively
I
now?
would guarantee it. I wouldn't do it. No. It's different for France. They're neighbors, more or less. We have an ocean in between. It's different for Germany, although Germany is much less involved than they should be, and other countries. But, we have a big ocean in between. One of the things I think is so unfair, David, I think it's terrible, is that we're at least $100 billion more than Europe, meaning Europe as a whole, put together. And the economies are similar size, believe it or not. That put together and us is about a very similar economy size. But it's much more important for them. It's important for everyone. You have to have, look, this would have never happened if I were president. Putin would have never done it. And it happened for two reasons. It also happened because oil went through the roof and he had all this money to prosecute the war. But the oil was at a much lower level, the price of oil. He wouldn't have been able to afford the war. All of a sudden, when it hit almost $100 a barrel, he said, he's one of the few to make money during a war because The oil has gone, and it stayed very high. It's extremely high right now, and it's going up. Oil prices all over the country are going up, as you probably have noticed. But I will tell you, that would have never happened. Ukraine would have never happened. The Israeli attack would have never happened. And inflation would have never happened. Those are three big things. Inflation would have never happened. But with Ukraine, and now it's very much, look, Ukraine is now, I read the other day where they don't have the soldiers, they don't have the manpower, they want to use children, they want to use old people, very old people, people that are not really perhaps equipped to fight. They're not doing well.
The average age of their soldier is like 43 now. So they're they're literally running out of people. To make a peace deal there, would you be willing to take NATO expansion off the table if that's what it took to get the Russians and the Ukrainians to make a deal? Would you be willing to do that?
So for 20 years, I heard that NATO, if Ukraine goes into NATO, it's a real problem for Russia. I've heard that for a long time. And I think that's really why this war started. I'm not sure that this war would have started. Biden was saying all of the wrong things. And one of the wrong things, he was saying, no, Ukraine will go into NATO. That's one of the many things he said. When I listened to him speak, I said, this guy is going to start a war. Because as you know, for 4 years, there was never even talk of Russia going into Ukraine. That would have never happened. Russia was not going to attack Ukraine. As soon as I got out, they started to form along the lines. And I thought that Putin maybe, well, look, he's a good negotiator. I thought he was going to be doing that for negotiation purposes. Then all of a sudden they attacked. And I said, what's going on here? But if you look at the rhetoric from Biden, he was saying the opposite of what, in my opinion, you had to say. The things he was saying, and he's still saying it. He's saying things that are so crazy.
Inflammatory. Yeah.
I 100% agree. And, you know, it turns out that the month before the Russians invaded, Blinken told Lavrov that the administration was not only going to bring Ukraine into NATO, but that they thought it was okay for the United States to put nuclear weapons in Ukraine. So no wonder the Russians hit the roof. I mean, you talk about provocation.
Well, let's say you were running Russia. You wouldn't be too happy. And that's always been off the table. You know, it's a border. And it's always been, you know, I don't think that they would have, if they thought that that was going to remain sort of a territory where you don't have NATO, but they don't want to have soldiers right on their border. They don't want to have it. It's always been understood, and that's even before Putin. It's always been understood that that was a no-no. And now you can go against their wishes, and it doesn't mean they're right when they say that. But that was very provocative. And now it's even more provocative. And they're talking about, I hear routinely, they're now talking about Ukraine entering NATO. And now I hear France wants to go in and fight. Well, I wish them a lot of luck. I think good luck.
Sir, can I ask you about Israel-Palestine? So after October 7th, what's the right path to just resolve this once and for all and just move forward?
Again, it's so sad to me because it would have never happened. Iran was broke. They had no money. I sanctioned countries that wanted to buy oil from Iran, and I would have made a fair deal with Iran. I was going to get along with Iran. I was going to get along with everybody. We did the Abraham Accords. I think eventually Iran would have been in the Abraham Accords. We had 4 strong countries go in, and nobody went in since I got out. That whole thing should have been loaded up right now. It should have been full. They did nothing with the Abraham Accords that everybody said were great. They said, we're going to get the ultimate prize because of that. It was amazing. If anybody else did it, if a Democrat did it, they would have gotten every prize in the book, every prize in the book. But I did it, and it was a great thing that we did. It was a phenomenal thing. But when you look at what happened now and you see what's going on, it's very, 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 very sad. That attack would have never happened in a million years. Iran didn't have the money for Hamas. They didn't have the money for Hezbollah. They didn't have the money for any of the 28 other cells of terror or whatever you want to call them. Iran was broke. I say respectfully. They had no money, and they weren't given money. And actually, it was a big story when I was toward the end of my term. There was a lot of big stories that there was no terror going on because Iran didn't have the money. They had to survive. We would have made a deal good for everybody. Everybody would have been happy. The main thing is Iran can't have a nuclear weapon. That was my main thing. The deal was a simple deal. Iran can't have a nuclear, it can't have a missile, can't have a nuclear missile. It cannot have that nuclear capability. Other than that, we talk about everything. They would have been very happy. It would have been fine. and you would have had peace in the Middle East. The problem is, I had them at a point where you could have negotiated. A child could have made a deal with them, and Biden did nothing. He did nothing.
He doesn't like to negotiate.
A young man that knew nothing or a young woman that knew nothing in kindergarten could have made a deal with Iran at that time because they wanted to make a deal. And Biden never took advantage of it. Now, they put back no sanctions, all of the different things that they gave him. China buys billions and billions of dollars of oil every month, many billions of dollars a month. Other people are buying. So Iran now has $250 billion cash. They made it all in 3.5 years. And now they're much tougher to deal with. And I will tell you, I got along great with Kim Jong-un. We solved that problem. Nobody was in danger. But this is a big problem. This is a real problem. And within 90 days or so, they're going to have and could have very well a nuclear weapon. And wow. Israel is a big difference in Israel between Iran with a nuclear weapon and Iran without a nuclear weapon. And lots of luck in that negotiation. That's going to be a much more difficult negotiation.
President Trump, I wanted to ask you a question about Roe v. Wade. You promised your base that you would overturn Roe v. Wade. You added 3 people to the Supreme Court, and you delivered on that promise. This might be the issue that determines the election, and many people believe it is. Are you going to do a national abortion ban? Would you support that, yes or no?
So I don't need a national ban because it's up to the states. Right now, what I did is something that people have wanted to do from day one. 51 years it's been going on. And if you remember, over the years, you're too young, but over the years, all they wanted to do is they wanted to take it out of the federal government and move it into the states. And I got that done with the selection of 3 great justices. I got it done. And it was a big thing. But I will say over the last 10 years, or maybe a little bit more than that, they started talking about the number of weeks and this and that. A lot of different subjects came in. It was no longer just simply bringing it back. Every legal scholar, from Democrat to Republican, liberal, conservative, they all wanted it given to the states, because from a legal standpoint, from a lot of other standpoints, including even a moral standpoint, they wanted it brought back to the states. And what I did is I got it back to the states. And now the states are in charge and the people are voting. And some votes are coming out the way certain people wanted, and some votes aren't coming out the way certain people wanted. I mean, if you look at Ohio, I would say it was a more liberal vote than people would have thought. And you could say that for Kansas. And then you look at Texas, it was a different story. But the people of the states have got that issue now, and they're voting. And the one thing that we have to remember, that there's been a lot of radicalism talked about, and the radicalism is really on the left because they're willing to do abortions in the 8th and 9th month. And even beyond that, I mean, we have some people, the governor, take a look at the governor of Virginia, the former governor of Virginia, where he talked about we will kill the baby after the baby is born. That's a very radical stance, and hopefully that's all going to be taken off the table now. But just to put it simply, it's now up to the states. And like Ronald Reagan, I'm a believer in the exceptions, the 3 exceptions, as you know, and rape, incest, life of the mother, the danger for the life of the mother. And we have a situation now where it's in the states' hands, and the states are going to be voting. The last thing people want, the people are going to be voting. The last thing people want is for that to go back into the federal government. It was always fought, and very importantly, and people wanted it, they wanted it back in the states where it belongs legally and for a lot of other reasons.
So you wouldn't support a national ban?
No, I wouldn't support a national ban. No, I would not.
Just shifting back to foreign policy for a moment, Mr. President, on the relationship with China, it's funny how Democrats and Republicans seem to have a unified voice and banging the drums on the rise of China. Do you think that war with China is inevitable? And if not, how do we avoid it?
I think it's not inevitable. I think it's unlikely. I know President Xi very well, and we got along great until COVID. Then I wasn't so happy with him because they gave it to us. I said it came from the Wuhan lab. I was right about that. They said then it started in Italy, and then it started in France. It started everywhere but there, but it started in China. And it was many, many millions of people died all over the world and cost the world probably $60 trillion, which is more money than China has and more money than anybody has. The death and destruction has been unbelievable. But I think it's high. If you have the right president, we can live at peace with China. We can do very well with China, compete with China. But we don't have the right president right now. He's not respected by China. He's being laughed at by China. And he's a Manchurian candidate. I mean, he's received money from China, his family. And that makes him, to me, somebody that shouldn't be negotiating. He's got a conflict of interest. But no, I don't see war with China as being inevitable at all.
President Trump, do you think that Fauci and our government funded gain-of-function research? And do you think we should really be pursuing the investigation deeply into that? And if we did fund gain-of-function research, what does that say about our government and taking ownership of it? Because a lot of us lost a lot of years. Kids didn't go to school. And it caused economic damage. As you pointed out earlier, the amount of money you had to spend to try to avoid a depression was really severe. And if we funded that, what does that make you think about our government? And then Fauci covering it up, if that is in fact true, what does that make you think about our government?
So if you remember, I'm the one that stopped it. And I stopped it maybe for a lucky reason or an unusual reason. I said, why are we paying money to China? It wasn't about gain of function or anything else. It was, why are we paying money to China? China's got a lot of money. And they're doing fine. You know, we're considered like, they want us to consider them a growing nation, a nation in distress, all sorts of things, because they always take advantage of every treaty by saying that they need, you know, they're an improving nation. I heard the other day they have all different terms for changing, but they're a growing nation. Well, we're a growing nation too. We're a nation that's becoming a third world nation based on what we're seeing. But I was the one that stopped that when I saw that. I was the one that stopped that. The Fauci thing is an interesting phenomena. I was not a big fan of his. As you know, he said, no, let everybody come in from China. I overrode him on that. I overrode him on a lot. But he wanted the people from China. When I heard about this, I stopped it. We had a room loaded up with people, and nobody could even believe it. But I stopped it. We would have lost hundreds of thousands of people more, maybe more, much more, maybe over the millions, but hundreds of thousands of people more had I not stopped people coming in from China.
Did he lie to you about the origin of COVID?
Well, I've always said the origin was, where it came from, where it originally came from was the Wuhan lab. I happen to think it escaped from the Wuhan lab. I mean, I don't believe it came from the bats in 2,000 miles away caves. I don't believe it came from other countries, as China tried to convince people it did. I thought it should have been called the China virus because it was a very much more accurate term than COVID. Nobody knows what COVID even means. Why is it COVID? No, I was always...
But did Fauci lie to you, I guess, is what the American people want to know. Did Fauci lie to you? And if he did, should he be prosecuted?
I don't think you have to understand, Fauci was a much bigger factor in the Biden administration than he was in the Trump administration. I didn't rely on him that much because I didn't trust him. I would say got along with him, fine. Not really, but I didn't trust him. And again, I was the one that stopped the money going to China. I didn't like it. I didn't stop it because of COVID. I didn't stop it because of anything other than, why are we paying money to China? It was strange. They should pay us money. We shouldn't pay them money. And one of the things I can tell you, the World Health Organization, so we pay them almost $500 million, and China pays them $39 million. And so I got out of the World Health Organization. They did absolutely nothing. They called it totally wrong. I got out. They called me and they said, we'll do anything to keep you in, anything. I said, well, why are they paying $39 million? We're paying almost $500 million. And they said, well, we'll work out a deal where you can pay much less. I said, well, now you're starting to talk. But even that, it was very popular when I got out. It was politically, it would have been very hard to go back in. People were thrilled that I got out. I could have made a deal to go in for $39 million. They offered me a deal to go in for $39 million, and I actually turned it down. I said, it should be if you look at, we're at 350 million and they're at 1.4 billion people, right? So it should have been 25% or less than that. But I didn't want to quibble. But I could have gone back in immediately for $39 million as opposed to 500. Then a horrible, horrible election which helped destroy our country took place in 2020. And they went back in and they're paying more than $500 million. And they knew I could have made a deal. Now, it's a lot of money, not when you talk about the world, but it's still a lot of money. But it shows you the stupidity of the whole thing. They could have made a deal for $39 million. Instead, they're paying much more than they paid even before. And that's the way the mindset of our country is. And here's the big part. China totally controls the WHO. China totally controls them. We have very little control over them. And now they want to give control over our whole country to them, which would be a terrible mistake.
Fauci brings up sort of the kind of deep state personality that you talked about in 2016 that's kind of like riddled all over the government. How much progress do you think you made, and what do you want to do if you become president in November? And do you have goals around the deep state this time around? And what are they?
Well, I have a lot of things. I mean, I did a lot of things in the FBI. I fired a lot of their top people, including Comey, who's terrible at what he did, a terrible person and terrible at what he did. I fired McCabe, and, I don't have to go through Lisa and Strzok, all of the lovers. And I fired the whole group of people. I got rid of them. And so many of the agents are so incredible in the FBI down below. But we got rid of a lot. You take a look at the World Health again. We got out of the World Health. We got out of this is a similar thing that, this is really similar to your answer, but we got out of the World Health Organization, which was a tremendous thing. We got rid of the Paris Accord. The Paris Accord was a disaster for us. We were going to pay $1 trillion, and other countries were paying nothing. Russia was paying nothing. China was paying nothing. It didn't even kick in for China until 2030, whereas with us, it kicked in immediately. So I got rid of the Paris Accord. I did a lot of things having to do with not only people, but tremendous amounts of money, because the Paris Accord was so unfair. And I said, when I do this, people are not going to like it, but I have to do it because it's right. People loved it. The public understood it. They loved it. And now they've gone back into the Paris Accord at the same terms and even worse than the terms I got out. It's really a shame. It's so many things. It's so sad to see so many things. I mean, the WHO, the Paris Accord, you take a look at these things, they could have gone back. If they wanted to go back, if they had it, they could have gone back for a fraction of what they were doing. And they're very unfair to the United States. We're like a lapdog for every other country.
Mr. President, I know you're running out of time here, but we haven't had a chance for you to speak to the border situation yet. So I want to give you a chance to address that, because that's always been really one of your main issues since 2016. You wanted to build a wall. The Democrats did everything they could to thwart that. You built the wall, but then Biden left a bunch of holes in it and then sold off the parts for scrap metal. And now we've had and repealed your executive orders. So I want to give you a chance to speak to that. But one piece I want to just add in as a follow-up question is, a lot of tech CEOs say, if we fix the border, can we get more H-1Bs for tech workers? So can you address that as well as what's going on at the border?
Yes, so we built hundreds of miles of wall, David, as you know, and we're very proud of it. We did it as per specification by the Border Patrol. They wanted exactly the wall that we did, with the climb panel on top, with steel, concrete, and then rebar, and all of the things that they wanted to have vision through it, clearly through it. And because I thought about concrete plank, frankly, going up 40 or 50 feet, and they didn't like that. They wanted to have vision through, and I understood that too. I sort of disagreed with it, but that's okay. We actually brought climbers in, Mount Everest climbers, to climb, and we built a very hard wall to climb. It's a very effective wall. And we built hundreds of miles, and then we're going to add quite a bit at the very end. And we bought about 200 additional miles, and it was ready to be put up. Could have been put up in 3 weeks, maybe 4 weeks. And areas that were rough areas that were people coming in, because as you build the wall, they go in different areas, right? They go further out. It was so effective. It was so effective. Mexico gave us a lot of troops for free because of a certain negotiation that I had with them. You heard that. But it was so effective, the wall. But Biden, they didn't want to put up those slats that were going up routinely by us. That means you had gaps. You had, as an example, you had gates in certain area that we put up. We were going to put up big, powerful gates that we could open, and you could let equipment through, et cetera, if you needed it. And they got rid of everything. They sold it for 5 cents on the dollar, much of it, 5 cents on the dollar. I said, I can't believe it. And that's the first time that I said they're serious. They actually want open borders. They want an open border. Nobody could believe it. I couldn't believe it because I never believed they wanted an open border, because who would be stupid enough to want an open border? Look what's happened with an open border. I was very proud of that. We had the safest border in the history of our country, and now we have the worst border in the history of the world. We had a safe border. I had a remain in Mexico policy, catch and release in Mexico, not in the United States. Everything was so good. But the remain in Mexico was a big deal. Not easy to get, but it was a big deal. They were in Tijuana, hundreds of thousands of people. They had to be approved to come into our country. And now you look at what's happened. We've been overrun. It's an invasion of our country by people. Many people come out of jails and prisons. They come out of mental institutions, insane asylums, and we have terrorists coming into our country at a level that we've never seen before. It's a very sad.
I never understood why the wall was so controversial. You know, every country needs to have a border, and a wall is a really good way to enforce a border. I never understood why they were so animated about stopping you from building the wall after you ran on that issue in 2016. They held you up for years with litigation. And then, like you said, they wouldn't just finish the little pieces of it, and they left big holes in it. And I think you're right. The only conclusion is they want an open border. I mean, how else do you explain it?
They want to destroy our country. You know, the fact is, it's incredible. The big mistake I made, I should have said, I will not build a wall. We do not want a wall. And that wall would have gone up in 15 minutes.
The more important point, I think, Mr. President, is we need high-skilled workers in this country.
Yes.
We need to recruit the best and brightest from the world. Every time we get somebody super intelligent from India or Europe, any country, that's
3 of us are
less,
immigrants, sir.
Yeah, and 3 of the 4 here are immigrants, the ones without the ties. And we can get these great people into our country, and that's a loss for our adversaries and our competitors, and it's a gain for us. But I've never heard you talk about this. Can you please promise us you will give us more ability to import the best and brightest around the world to America?
I do promise, but I happen to agree. That's why I promise. Otherwise, I wouldn't promise. Let me just tell you that it's so sad when we lose people from Harvard, MIT, from the greatest schools and lesser schools that are phenomenal schools also. And what I wanted to do, and I would have done this, but then we had to solve the COVID problem because that came in and, you know, sort of dominated for a little while, as you perhaps know. But what I want to do and what I will do is you graduate from a college, I think you should get automatically as part of your diploma a green card to be able to stay in this country. And that includes junior colleges too. Anybody graduates from a college, you go in there for 2 years or 4 years. If you graduate or you get a doctorate degree from a college, you should be able to stay in this country. And you know more stories than I do, but I know of stories where people graduated from a top college or from a college and they desperately wanted to stay here. They had a plan for a company, a concept, and they can't. They go back to India, they go back to China, they do the same basic company in those places, and they become multi-billionaires employing thousands and thousands of people, and it could have been done here. And a bigger example is you need a pool of people to work for your companies. You have great companies, and they have to be smart people. Not everybody can be less than smart. You need brilliant people. And we force the brilliant people, the people that graduate from college, the people that are number one in their class from the best colleges, you have to be able to recruit these people and keep the people. It was such a big deal. Somebody graduates at the top of the class. They can't even make a deal with the company because they don't think they're going to be able to stay in the country. That is going to end on day one.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I think we all wholeheartedly agree with that. Being in the tech industry, we understand the importance of that. They're telling us that you have to go to dinner, Mr. President. So thank you so much for spending so much time with us. We really appreciate it. It's been great having this conversation with you.
I'm sorry. I have to ask one question, sir. When you got elected in the 2016 election, you said the first thing or one of the things you wanted to do was release the JFK file. And then you said later, I saw it and I wasn't really ready to do it. And then I saw a clip where you changed your mind and you said, I think we're ready to see this file. And I'm just curious.
What's in it?
What? No,
tell us right now.
What happened? Like what? Yeah.
I actually did do it. I released a lot, as you know. But when it came to the whole thing, I was hit by some people that worked for me that are great people that you would respect. And they asked me not to do it. And I'm saying, why? Tell me why. And they said, sir, I think it needs a little more time. And I released a lot, but I said, if they feel so strongly, I respect the people and would have done that again. But this time, I'm just going to do it.
RFK says the CIA killed his uncle. Do you believe that?
Well, this wasn't CIA that asked me, but I think CIA was probably behind it. But they didn't. They would have preferred that I not release the rest of it. So we did give quite a bit. It's going to be done early on. A lot of people want to see that. And whatever it may say, I won't say. I sort of have an idea. But whatever it is, it'll be very interesting for people to see. And we're going to have to learn from it.
Promise us you'll come back again, Mr.
You know,
President.
there are other things we're going to release, too. We're going to release.
Oh, really? Like what? What else do you got?
We'll talk to you about it off camera.
Aliens?
By the way, generally speaking, and there are reasons not to release certain things, obviously, but it's transparency, and I think it's important that we release that. And there are other things, too. There are other things that you know about. But people, more than anything else, they want the JFK files. We're going to release that immediately.
You have a prediction for the debate next week? What's going to happen?
Well, all I can say is this. I watched him with Paul Ryan, and he destroyed Paul Ryan. Paul Ryan with the water. He was chugging water at a left and right. I didn't think a human being would be able to drink so much water at one time. And he beat Paul Ryan. So I'm not underestimating him. It is what it is. We'll see what happens. But you take a look at the last one. I happen to think he's incompetent for a lot of reasons. I think he's incompetent because he has gotten the worst policies, both foreign policy and internal policy. I mean, who would not want to have a wall? Who wants to have millions of people pouring in? Who wants to have high taxes? You know, taxes are going to raise by 4 times if this guy has his plan.
Is he in cognitive decline? Do you believe he's in cognitive decline, Mr. President?
Well, I shouldn't be the one to say that, but I don't think he's doing particularly well. But I didn't think he was well 25 years ago. I thought he was not a smart person. And that was told to me by a certain member of the Kennedy family who was actually very friendly with me through a Palm Beach relationship. And I was told that very strongly. But so I was never a fan of his. But I will say he beat Paul Ryan. It was still years ago, but he beat Paul Ryan pretty badly. And I assume he's going to be somebody that will be a worthy debater. Yeah, I would say. I think okay. I don't want to underestimate him.
All right.
I think that's smart. Well, your team is telling us that they need you to go to a dinner, Mr. President. Obviously, we could keep going for hours and hours, but it's been great to we could. But it's been great to have you for the last hour here, and it's been great getting to know you with the dinner that we did, and we hope that you'll come back on our show. Podcasts are getting bigger and bigger, so hopefully in your second term you'll come on here and talk to us again.
Think Biden would do this interview? I don't think
Absolutely
so.
not.
Absolutely
not.
So. He'd be lost.
I don't think
after
so.
one
We've
question.
invited him.
I don't think he's doing these
sir.
interviews.
Yeah.
So it's an honor to be with you all. Very good question.
We appreciate it, sir. Thank you.
Appreciate it very much, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. There you have it. Wow. That was some hour, boys. What do we think?
Let's do a wrap up, huh?
We got to do a little wrap here. Whew.
J. Cal, what are your big takeaways?
Well, I'm undecided, as you know. We had a limited amount of time with him, and obviously,
J. Cal, just say it. Just say it. You like him. You didn't. You were. Just say it. Just say it because it's written all across your face. Just say it. You like him. You're confused.
I have some blockers.
He crushed your questions. No, he crushed your questions. Admit
I think
it.
he did.
You asked tough questions.
You asked great questions, and he just dealt with them head on. Just admit it. You like him. You like him. You look at him.
Well, I do like the fact that he came on the pod.
I told you you'd like him. I told you you'd like him. This is my point. Whether you come out of it wanting to vote for the president or not,
sure.
Everybody needs to, I think, just sit in a room and just hear him out.
If you want me to answer the question, what I'll say is there are some blockers I have that we didn't get to. January 6th, obviously. I did, one of the blockers I have is obviously Roe v. Wade. And I think he handled that question really well. And I think we may have gotten a little bit of breaking news there in terms of him saying he would not do the national ban. And I think that's a big concern people have. And I think that's maybe the issue, according to a lot of experts. I'm starting to sound like Trump. According to a lot of experts, people believe that could be the deciding issue of the election. And so I think he handled it really well by saying the states are going to choose and he's not going to do the federal ban, and he believes in the exemption.
He was very unequivocal about that, really clear that he would not do a national ban, really clear that the states would decide. And furthermore, he understood that the states are deciding. There's been a bunch of referenda at the state level, and they are generally coming out on the pro-choice side. And he indicated that he understood that some of the votes are not turning out the way that people may have thought.
And he's going to respect people want. Right. 80% of people
He's going to respect democracy.
Yeah.
He's going to respect democracy on that issue.
Yeah.
So I think he nailed that question.
I think he was very definitive about Ukraine not entering NATO. And I think he was very definitive about an H-1B policy that's pro-productivity and immigration.
That was the part I like best, if I'm being honest.
Giving grads green cards, that's like such a good
That's
idea.
breaking news too, by the way. I think we elevated the discussion about immigration beyond the wall and into recruitment, which is what I have been trying to do on this podcast for a couple of years here now. So to hear the president say, I will do that for you because I want that, that to me was palatable. And, there's a lot of things I agree with him on. And the January 6th stuff we didn't get to. So apologies to the audience on that. I know a lot of people have feelings about it, but you can only get so much from 50 minutes of interview. I think you did a great job.
CNN did a whole town hall on that issue. I mean, quite frankly, I felt like we dealt with a lot of substance here. So, but Chamath, I agree with you. He was really clear on Ukraine. He went further than he has in the past. In the past, he said that he'll get a peace deal very quickly and that he wants the people to stop dying. But in this interview, he went further. He said that if France or other European countries send in troops, the U.S. definitely will not participate in that. We are not going to send American boots on the ground. The Biden administration, I don't think, has said that definitively the way that President Trump said it. Moreover, he understood that a major cause of the war was the desire to bring Ukraine into NATO. And I've never heard anyone in the administration say that. And he went further and said they keep saying these provocative things about, even now they keep repeating that Ukraine's going to be part of NATO. So he understood the provocation there.
Freeberg, what's your take on him? You haven't come out and said who you're voting for, but this is your first time interacting with him, albeit for 50 minutes in a group setting. But what's your impression?
It's a difficult forum because we can't go deep and ask responsive questions, and we don't have a lot of time, and there's four of us trying to ask questions. So the format is a little difficult to get to the heart of the matter on some of these complicated topics like federal spending, deficit,
we need 2 hours.
Debt. Yeah, and I think you need to just be able to hone in on the question, his response on how are we going to reduce kind of the bureaucratic overhead and the wasteful spending in the federal government. And he kind of pivoted to the Department of Education. That's 3% of the federal budget. I want to talk about the rest of it. And, it took us 200 years as a country to add $1 trillion to our federal debt to go from 0 to $1 trillion. And now we're adding $1 trillion every 100 days. And it's going to take a lot more than just 1 to 3% cuts in spending to get us out of the spiral that we're in. I also am concerned I think very rightly so. And I think he acknowledges the concerns that were mentioned by Larry Summers that tariffs plus tax cuts could lead to serious inflation and economic contraction. Those are really difficult things to do together unless you have a very clear plan for massively cutting spending at the federal level. So I don't feel like I got to the heart of the matter on those points. And as you guys know, that's what I care so deeply about. I think we need to fix the machine to be able to do the things we want the machine to do over time. And I'm very deeply worried about that.
I had a couple of reactions to that. So number one is I thought it was interesting how he reacted to the question about Larry Summers, because he knows Larry Summers and he actually said several very complimentary things towards him. So he may not agree with him on everything, but he said that Larry had gotten a bunch of things right. And he's an interesting guy. And Larry did get the inflation call right. Remember, at the very beginning of the Biden administration. So it was interesting. I thought that President Trump handled that question very tactfully, I think. It's not like he wasn't looking to attack anyone or anything like that.
Do we really buy he's going to do this tariffs thing anyway? Like, it seems like that's a bit of pandering maybe to the voter base. It sounds like a great solution, right? But I don't think he's going to do it. Yeah.
Once the economic advisors get together and look at the analysis and what this will do to costs of things, inflation will go up, et cetera. Maybe there's a rethink ultimately on how that's implemented and on what particular slices of the economy it's implemented. So I'm sure, as you point out, it probably gets toned down for this to even become a realty. It seems quite
just on the second piece on the deficit. Jake, you asked a pretty tough question there, where you basically said, "Look, the debt has grown as much under your first term as it has under Biden." Remember that, the $8 trillion or something?
It's almost exactly going to be the same. 6.5 to date from Biden, 7.8 trillion.
But I think he had a pretty good answer, which was that, look, at the first year of COVID, we were dealing with, a potential depression. I don't know if he mentioned that the economy, GDP was down 30%.
Yeah, he talked about 1929.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So he basically explained that we had to do that. But then after that, we shouldn't have kept going. And I do think that Trump is just not as big a spender as Biden. I mean, look, Biden's been in Washington for 50 years. He thinks government's the answer for everything. He loves spending money. And he spent trillions on COVID even after we didn't need to. So I get the sense that Trump was a reluctant spender. I'm not saying he didn't spend, but whereas Biden, I think, is a eager spender. And
I disagree.
I think
any modern politician wants to spend because it's popular. I just think it's their nature.
I think if Trump had the power by himself to rein in spending, I think he would. I think the issue is that the president by himself can't do that much.
Which is what my follow-up question was, right? I was trying to ask him, like, can you actually do it as president or not? Like, is there the wherewithal to do it?
I think the other aspect I wanted to see, I'm really glad he talked about de-dollarization. And he mentioned it up front. And so that to me really resonated. It really rings true to the effect of U.S. spending, U.S. foreign policy. So much of this is driving, and I'm concerned about, driving the Saudis into the arms of the Chinese and other foreign adversaries to the United States. And I would have really liked to have spent a little time with him on the Saudi relationship, where he sees that headed, how the Saudi relationship will affect the Middle East, and how the Saudi relationship could affect the U.S. dollar and dollar reserves around the world. But I think he's acutely aware of de-dollarization and foreign reserves in dollars being sold down, and that there are serious effects to that. I didn't hear a follow-up on like what the specific responses will be, to the drivers there, which I would have loved to have spent a little more time on.
Chamath, what do you think will be the viral moments to come out of this, if any? What do you think the mainstream media or social media will take from this? Any moments you think were breaking news or notable?
Well, I think there's a lot of clarity on a couple of important points. One is no federal ban on abortion. I think that's important news for a lot of people. The second is this clarity on H-1Bs, which is very different from what has to be done at the border. And I think that was very clear and new. And I think it's very positive for our community, meaning the tech industry.
Absolutely.
I think
that's why I push
we need that clarity, because we're trying to hire these people and we are losing them every day. And then the third was, I think the clarity on NATO was also very definitive. And I think that's important. The fourth, which was an implication of what he said, which is a little depressing, is I think there's a lot of us that want to see this Israeli-Palestine conflict resolved. And I think what he's saying is we can't, because we've let the genie out of the bottle. We have an adversary now with $250 billion of excess cash who has no incentive to negotiate.
Iran.
That's Iran. So that's really depressing. And then the fifth one was around this JFK thing. The reason why I asked the JFK question is not necessarily that I have a specific interest in JFK, but it's emblematic of, it's a proxy for this deep state, this idea of secrets, or this idea of there's a layer of people that are embedded in the United States government that decides on behalf of all of us. And I think when you have somebody who can push back against that and use transparency and sunlight as the cleansing function, that is what we need.
If we're going to rebuild trust in our government and institutions, we're going to need a lot more transparency. And if that one's hanging out there, why not resolve it? I mean, did he say he thinks the CIA did it? I think I heard him say that. I think the CIA did it.
What I heard was he said
the CIA was behind
the people that were influencing him not to. No, I think what he said was
they didn't want the information out.
We should be clear about that, because it could be quoted out of context.
Yeah, we're going to need to see the transcript on that.
He did not say that he thought the CIA was behind.
No, he did not say. He didn't come anywhere close.
Right.
He said that he thought the CIA was behind the folks that were telling him to not do it, and he listened to them out of trust and respect for them, which I think that's a reasonable judgment in the moment.
Nick, we got to see that transcript. Yeah.
My point is, exposing that is a very important way of giving the influence and power back to the people.
Absolutely.
I've mentioned this quote from Mike Pompeo, which is really powerful, but it's something to the effect of, the people on the top floor of the CIA do not believe it's a Democrat or a Republican that runs America, but that they do. And he said that in the context of being asked, what is the one regret you have, or some of the biggest regrets you have in running the CIA? And Pompeo said that he didn't fix that. So I think that there's a lot of embedded versions of this establishment class that lurk in many institutions, whether it's the EPA, whether it's the CIA, whether it's the NIH. And if there are ways in which the president can unlock the data that's necessary or the information for all of us to have a little bit more clarity on what's happening, I think it's important. And I do think for many people, that the JFK file is representative of a lot of them.
Well, and then dovetailing that, Sachs, the Fauci discussion, where he said, I never trusted Fauci, and then kind of pushing it on like, hey, do you think he should be prosecuted? Did we fund it or not? Seems pretty clear. He believes we funded Gain of Research. His position was, I just didn't want to spend the money, which I appreciate about him.
With China.
With China,
You
yeah.
want to spend the money in China, yeah.
Yeah, and so what did you think of that point? Yeah.
Well, I thought that his response on that was similar to a lot of his responses, which is he did not take the edgy position that he was sort of being teed up to take. I mean, kind of like same thing with like the Larry Summers thing. You know, he had mild criticism, I thought, for Fauci, but he didn't go scorched earth at all on Fauci there. And
he said he didn't trust him. He said, I never trusted him.
Nobody.
That's pretty scorched earth for politics.
Nobody trusts Fauci. You asked him whether Fauci should be prosecuted. He did not take the bait on that. That's my point.
He was very respectful, actually. I was very surprised to hear how he respected Fauci and how he framed his response to that question. And I think that says a lot.
But can I tell you why you're surprised? Because I think we have been fed, this is what I'm saying, we have been fed a narrative of what President Trump looks like. Now, in fairness, we're also being fed a narrative of what President Biden is like. And this is why you have to see these men up close and personal for yourself. Because, David, the fact that you're surprised is less about the fact that Donald Trump has changed.
Right.
It's more the fact that you've been told a narrative and you've believed it. And so now when you see the actual truth, you have to re-underwrite. Hold on a second. He's actually pretty thoughtful. He's pretty presidential. He doesn't go off on people. That's not what you probably thought going in, because that's not what the mainstream media portrays about what you should be thinking about.
Well, in fairness, he has gone in on people pretty hard over the last 8 years.
He's a counterpuncher. I don't think he hits people unless they hit him first. I mean, that's his pattern. But look, I agree with Chamath here that my overall take on this, and look, my position is clear because I wrote a long post on X endorsing Trump a couple of weeks ago. But everything I heard here in this interview is consistent with the reasons why I stated I want to support him. He clearly favors a pro-growth agenda. He wants to keep taxes low and reasonable. He wants to reduce regulations. He's wanted to increase the number of H-1Bs, get the dream team over here for tech while sealing the border, while cutting down on crime in blue cities. He talked about how crime was out of control. He wants to negotiate peace deals. He, I think, understands very well why we have this war going on in Europe. Overall, I heard a lot of reassuring things. And I didn't hear anything that I would put in the category of a grievance or a desire for revenge. You know, the media is trying to portray him as like seeking vengeance or something like that.
Well, that's because he says he is.
Didn't get that
He said
vibe
over
at
and
all.
over again. Let's be clear. He said over again, I will be your retribution. So he may not have said it on this podcast.
Did you get any of that in this interview?
No, I've just heard him say it 50 times in the last 60 days. So,
but Sachs, where would you like to have seen him be stronger?
Maybe it's the same clip played over and over again on CNN.
Where would you like to have seen him be stronger or different on any of his major positions? What would you, as his advisor, advise him to shift or double down on a bit?
Well, I mean, I think Chamath is right that with respect to the Middle East, I think his position isn't perfectly clear because it's not only about Iran in the Middle East, right? But the truth of the matter is, politically, I don't know that he could say more. And, you know, I think that's just a very, very tough issue where you're bound to alienate and polarize one side or the other. And so I think he's sort of definitely walking a tightrope there.
Yeah, when he says it would never have happened, like I'm always like, ugh, you know, like it would never happen under me. I would like to have a little more of the why. Why do you believe that? And he never gets into the details. He just says that over and over.
But maybe he's right. You know, like when I hear Trump talk, what I hear is someone who's a deal maker. He was a deal maker in business. Now he's a deal maker politically. He's willing to have conversations with anybody. There was even a moment when he's talking about Iran where he said maybe he could have worked out a deal. But in any event, he's somebody who I think is willing to negotiate, which is, I think, is a positive thing, because when's the last time Biden negotiated anything? He doesn't seem interested at all.
I mean, I didn't get to ask, but one of the things I had queued up was, I just think you've done a phenomenal job in talking to people who most people feel are difficult people to get along with. Kim Jong-un, Xi, Putin. I think it's a superpower is talking to dictators, despots, people who are cantankerous and difficult, and he always seems to get the better of them, or at least gets our interests as Americans aligned with whatever their interests are. So I think,
let me ask you,
give him an A plus on that.
Yeah, I don't want to be insulting. I'm asking, like, in the past, you've said that he was embracing the dictators and he was kowtowing to them. I think you've said comments like that in the past where
no,
you saw this and yes, or something that felt like he was more trying to embrace and engage with them in a way that's like, why would you?
I've always felt you should talk to everybody all the time. That's not my issue with Trump. It's never been my issue with him. I think that's like a superpower. The fact that he went into North Korea and stepped over in the DMZ, you saw the look on Kim Jong-un's face. Kim Jong-un just wants a little attention. He wants a little recognition. And this idea, like, we're not going to give him any recognition is stupid, because if you give him a little recognition, now you're sort of tilting him towards, hey, maybe you could be part of this. Like, maybe you could come to the West and see a movie premiere or come to the NBA finals, as opposed to start lobbing, dysfunctional missiles over Japan. Like, maybe we can kind of...
that video where they're like setting up the little press shooting in the conference room with, oh my God, that video is so funny.
The smile on Kim Jong-un's face when Trump says, video. You want me to go over? Should I go over? Should I do it now? I'll go over. Okay. I'm gonna walk over. Okay. And Kim Jong-un is beaming, and you're like, he just played him. He played him. Like, he walked 10 feet into North Korea, and now Kim Jong-un's like, you know what? I don't need this message.
I guess my big unanswered question, I did want to ask him about, like, Dalio's prediction of, like, the cycle of empires, 500 years, 6 empires.
You're obsessed
cycle.
with that.
Well, let's play counterfactual, Freeberg. How do you compare the answers you've heard to what you have heard, or what you think President Biden's answers would be to the things that you care about?
I honestly feel like there's a little bit of a blinders to the question. Like, there's a pivot back to what I've done, what I'll do, versus the, like, let's actually talk about where we are in the debt cycle. And this is exactly what, like, history repeating itself. At the time that you take on all the debt, you drive internal conflict. January 6th is a great, like, data point. You drive external conflict. We've had 2 or 3 wars start in the last 4 years. How do we reverse those things so that we don't repeat history? And we sat down with Dalio and we asked him this question, is there a way to not repeat history? And he said, yes, there is. And we talked with Graham Allison about this. And all these guys believe that there's a way to avoid it. There have been moments where we've nearly had the external conflict. And that's why I asked him about war with China. But I want to understand if there is this broader kind of construct of what is going on. Because he hits on all the data points correctly. De-dollarization, increased spending, bloated bureaucracy, conflicts around the world, without taking it all into perspective and saying, man, like, this is where empires die. I guess he does say that, right? He does actually highlight exactly what Dalio
He doesn't do what Milei does, though, right? Like, Milei has said to the populace...
That's exactly, Milei has
he
the
just
best
needs to
response.
take that next Milei step and say, I will cut half the people working at these places. He kind of did say it when it came to education. I don't know what your interpretations were, gentlemen.
Get back to an entrepreneurial economy, right? Allow capitalism.
I think he did say around regulation. And then with respect to the bureaucracy, he pointed to education. He pointed
that was a good example, I think.
Energy, he pointed to the EPA.
The right things are on his radar screen.
Yeah.
You know,
I just hope he gets the right people around him, Sachs. Like, I mean, I need you in that
no more
cabinet.
Giuliani's and stupid people. You gotta, put smart people around him.
We need
not
a cabinet
Here's
and advisors on nuclear, on regulation and nuclear, on AI. Like,
in 2016, there was not the kind of people that, for example, were at this fundraiser that David and I organized was, I think, entirely different than what you saw in 2016. And I do think there's an opportunity where if you dipped your hand, like there was a young man in the audience who answered this AI question, and he talked about public key, private key, cryptography. It was beautiful. It was amazing. Very technical person. But there are all these people that are coming out of the woodwork. To your point, Freeberg, if he can figure out how to build a cabinet with those people, meaning these extremely technical, thoughtful people, then there's a real shot that you can change it.
I hope that's right. I pulled up some data going into our conversation. I just want to read this to you guys. Totally off topic, but I just want to say we can cut it out if you want. But construction for the Francis Scott Key Bridge, which is 1.6 miles long, when it was built in 1977, was $141 million, about $740 million in today's dollars. Today, they're estimating to repair, that's the bridge that collapsed in Baltimore. They're saying it's going to cost, $2 billion or more to repair that bridge now, 40 years later. California's bullet train project in 2008 was supposed to cost $40 billion. We're 15 years into this thing. We've spent $18 billion. They're now asking for $140 billion total to build a 171-mile track. That's a billion a mile. That's $1 billion a mile. Let me just tell you this other fact.
And the tracks are in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, and China just spent $300 billion to build 16,000 miles of high-speed rail. They're spending $18 million a mile. That's 2% of the cost of the California high-speed rail system, 2% per mile. We are 50 times more expensive than China. That is where superpowers shift. That is the fundamental premise of the shift that we've seen 5-6 times in the last 500 years. That's the question for the president.
Yeah, I mean, is it just time to privatize all that stuff?
It's layers of,
Of these two men, Trump or Biden, which one do you think is going to be more skeptical of big government spending? And which one is going to be more interested in being conducive to the private sector solving problems? I mean, to me, there's no comparison.
Well, which one do you think?
Obviously, Trump is all of his instincts are, let's empower the private sector. Let's cut regulations. Let's make taxes reasonable. Let's get the smartest people in the country. Let's have peace deals. Let's have growth.
What do you think, Freeberg?
I have heard conversations that there is an economic argument. I don't know if I buy it. That one of the reasons that they're trying to leave the border open is there is a low-cost labor pool that grows that actually is beneficial to economic growth. That there's just not enough in the workforce today to think about the cost of building that railroad in China versus the U.S. The average income in the U.S. is a couple turns on what it is in China.
You can also say you don't want to answer the question.
Between the two?
Yeah.
Man.
Ask this question more specifically.
Yeah, ask me. Yeah, honestly.
Who do you think is closer to your desired outcome? Trump or Biden?
I think Trump hits on it way more than Biden does. Yeah, he definitely hits on the concerns that I have. I don't know if he has the path that makes me feel great, let's, this is going to work.
Does Biden?
And I think the other thing I worry about is the leadership problem with Trump. Meaning, I don't mean him as a leader in terms of effectiveness, but just this Trump derangement syndrome is not something to be ignored and to be disparaging of the people that we all, that not we all, but people say have Trump derangement syndrome. It's a fundamental tilting that he does. And he tilts half the people in the country. He tilts them. And I think that is really, and maybe the other side is true as well.
Maybe it's a psychological problem that a lot of people have. It doesn't mean we should have a worse president.
So that's one argument. Or
maybe when he tried,
maybe there's a way to use unifying speech instead of divisive speech. And that is my other concern. Is just
or you speak directly to the people and you end up where Jake Al is at and where you're at, which is you've heard him face to face really for the first time.
I want to hear Biden face to face. I want to have a long conversation.
I would love to have Biden on here.
I totally agree.
We invited Biden on here too, and we're waiting breathlessly for him to accept the invitation. You got to give Trump credit for coming on the show, like he said.
Yeah.
And took all questions.
Yeah.
So you got to give Trump a lot of credit for that. But Freeberg, to your point about the TDS for a second, look, when Biden ran in 2020, he promised a return to normalcy. That was basically his sales pitch. We had just gone through COVID. There were a lot of people who had TDS or were tilted by Trump. And what Biden said is we're going to have normalcy. What actually happened? Well, I think Biden began this incredibly partisan and vindictive program of lawfare, of trying to prosecute not just Trump, but a lot of other people. We had the border basically opened up. I mean, Biden repealed all those executive orders on day one and did create those holes in the wall. There was absolutely no reason for that. We had this war in Ukraine that was easily avoidable if they just said the right things back in 2021. And I mean, I could go on. I mean, on the issue of tech, like we talked about, Everyone feels frozen right now. Crypto can't get a regulatory framework. No one can do M&A. So have we gotten the normalcy that we were promised? I don't think so. And on the other hand, what I heard from Trump in this interview was like he was sort of softened. He did not go scorched earth, even when he invited him to. He did not say prosecute Fauci.
I will agree. I will agree with you on that.
He did not. He had nice words to say about Larry Summers.
Yes.
He was, I thought this was a very moderate sounding Trump.
Maybe it's a different approach and I'm wrong and I'm just referencing the history with him. And I do agree with you that the way he spoke today about people that have been antagonistic about him or to him, like Larry Summers and Fauci, did surprise me, particularly after years of him sending out these tweets every morning about people that are antagonistic about him. And it was quite refreshing, honestly, and it felt different. So, I will give him credit on that point. I will agree with you on that, Sachs, for sure.
The point is, I think that we had an opportunity to interview the President of the United States.
And that was great.
Congrats. I think we talked about a broad spectrum of issues. I wish we had more time. I think he answered them precisely. And I think he was candid. And I think that he gave us new information, which I think is important. And I think it allowed you guys to see what I saw, which is if you're an independent or not a Republican, quote unquote, by name, and you have a preconceived notion of what President Trump is like, it's very difficult to keep that notion, is my point, after you hear him and after you meet him. And I think that that's a very important thing to keep in mind, because I don't think it says as much about President Trump as it does about the lens with which we are taught to think about all of these people, including President Biden. So I would just say, you got to think for yourself. And that's the most important takeaway. And I think that we are giving people ground truth data to underwrite your own opinion.
All right, everybody, this has been another amazing episode of the All In Podcast. Thank you, David Sachs, for getting President Trump to come on. President Biden, you are, of course, invited to come on. We encourage you to come on. Give us 50 minutes. Give us an hour and a half, whatever you got.
No, we've asked. We're waiting.
I'm just restating it for the record that if you, by some means, somebody in this group says we should, talk to the All In team since they're a top 10 podcast and every other presidential candidate's been on, who knows? Maybe somebody decides he's going to be able to keep up with the group. I don't think he can keep up. That's the big challenge. For the Rain Man, David Sachs, Chamath Palihapitiya, your chairman, dictator, and the Sultan of Science, David Fruitbert, I am the world's greatest moderator. You didn't moderate today. I'm sure guest, Sachs. Great job. We'll see you next time.
Great job, Sachs. Love you, boys.
Love you, boys.
Bye-bye.
We'll let your winners ride.
Rain Man, David Sachs.
And instead, we open source it to the fans, and they've just gone crazy with it.
Love you, West. The Queen of Quinoa. Besties are gone.
That's my dog taking a notice in your driveway, Sachs.
Oh, man.
My haberdasher will meet me at Clinton. We should all just get a room and just have one big huge orgy, because they're all just useless. It's like this sexual tension that they just need to release somehow.
Wet your beak. Wet your beak.
Your beak.
That's gonna be we need to get merch.
Besties are back.
Hey, everybody. Today, I'm very excited about our guest. I've been wanting to get Rick on here for a long, long time. Rick Clark is a fifth-generation farmer in Warren County, Indiana. His family has lived on the farm since the 1880s. He recently became a grandpa and is hopeful about what the next generation will bring to the farm, which now stretches 7,000 acres. The story of Rick's transition from chemical dependency to regenerative practices has propelled demand from other farmers to learn his strategies, and he has gathered national attention. In 2017, Rick was honored as Danone's Sustainable Farmer of the Year. Additionally, Land O'Lakes honored him with an Outstanding Sustainability Award, and he was also the regional winner of the American Soybean Association's Conservation Legacy Award. Currently, Rick is the Fields to Market 2019 recipient of the Sustainable Farmer of the Year Award. His farm runs on a 5-crop system: corn, soybean, wheat, alfalfa, and regen. I just want to read one other part of your biography because I think this is interesting. After Rick graduated from Purdue University with a degree in agriculture and economics, he took an unexpected path that by choosing to leave the family farm and to pursue a career in finance. After a friend told him about the opportunity, he packed his bag, worked at the heart of Chicago's financial district for 4 years, learning the ins and outs of the market, and he traded municipal bonds. So that's just adds another dimension to your bio. But tell us about that path, about what happened to you, and um, about how you made that transition from chemical agriculture that your family had been using to regenerative agriculture.
Well, first of all, I'm absolutely honored to be on your show today. Thank you for having me. This is probably one of the most important topics that we have in the world today. Is this regenerative style farming that can mitigate climate and save our planet? So, Bobby, the one thing that got me where we are today is one event, and it was a 1-inch rain event, and it created so much erosion that I could not believe, why are we still doing this? And that is what woke me up to then start implementing the principles of soil health. It was that.
Let me ask you something, because I've spent some time in Indiana. I haven't been to Warren County, but there are parts of Indiana that are like where I grew up in upstate New York and Massachusetts, which is rolling hills, broken field and forest, which is my kind of favorite landscape. But a lot of Indiana is like classic Midwest flatland. So was the erosion occurring on that kind of flat?
Yes, 1% slope. So Bobby, you couldn't tell if you were looking at this field if it was flat or not. It was 1%, and the field moved from not only the ditch, but it was also on the road. This is after we tilled the soil the day before. We went home that night planning to plant corn tomorrow. We got a 1-inch rain event that night, and boom, the field is on the road. Hit me like a truck right in the middle of the forehead, and it's time that we have to make a change. And I want to get a plug in right here if I can. Our farm is featured in a film called Common Ground. It's being shown across the country in theaters. There's going to be a big event on April the 22nd, Earth Day. But Bobby, a lot of this is in that film. The highlights of our journey are, but Bobby, this was back in 2007, and we've been on this this journey for a long time.
Well, so then what happened next? And by the way, just a background, I remember reading as a kid that the Midwest soils had some of the deepest, richest soils in the world. I think 14 inches, even more of sort of black topsoil from the ages. And so what does that look like today?
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously been erosion, and that amount of deep, lush organic matter has been cut at least by half. I mean, if you think about the short amount of time that we've been on this United States farming, and the amount of degradations that has occurred in that short amount of time is unfathomable, and it's just outrageous in my opinion. So we've lost at least a half of the parent material has been washed down the river, sitting in the Gulf of Mexico. But I'll tell you what really wakes you up, Bobby, is we just had a 2-inch rain event in our area here within the last 10 days, and our river is out of the banks. A 2-inch rain event should not get a major river out of its banks. That tells me that we don't have any water infiltration on our neighboring fields. I mean, on our fields, the last we've checked, which was a year ago, we've got water infiltration rates of over 20 inches an hour. That means we can take a 20-inch rain event in 1 hour and have no standing water or have no runoff. So that tells you what shape the rest of our landscape is in. if a 2-inch rain event floods the river basin.
Yeah, and by the way, I've spent a lot of my lifetime working on streams and rivers and thinking about them. And the things that create healthy ecosystems is a lot of water infiltration, the capacity of the landscapes to store water and then drip it slowly into the stream so that you have a constant flow year round. One of the worst things you can do to a stream is to flood it when there's rain events,
Right.
and then dry it out and starve it whenever whenever you have a dry spell. And if you want to build healthy, rich ecosystems, you need that water. So for flooding, to reduce flooding downstream,
Right.
to retain soil, to keep stream health and water health, all of those important things, you need healthy soils. It's really the answer to everything, right?
It is. And the other thing too there that I want to add to your thought is not only is the water going in slow and being pulled in through the profile, but it's cleaning that rainwater and it's leaving all of the nutrients and the minerals behind in your soil, and only clean water is coming out the other end. That's what's so important about this is figuring out how to reduce the amount of nitrogen and potassium in the water supply going down.
Phosphorus was another.
Or phosphorus, yes. Yeah. It's very much a problem. So, if I may, let me continue with my journey. So we got this 1-inch rain event, and now it's time to go do some research. So I start looking on the internet, and I start asking some people, and there's not a lot of people at this time that are really highly visible yet. So a lot of the research I did was on my own, and I came up with a species. It was called tillage radish. And the reason why I came up with the tillage radish was because it will winter kill, meaning that when you get a frost event, so if you're in a zone that gets cold enough to freeze, it will terminate the radish with the cold weather. So that was number one. It wasn't going to be any material I was going to deal with next spring. It was going to be alive. And number two, it was great mitigation for compaction, and it puts on a deep taproot to sequester the nutrients that are deep within the profile and pull them back to the surface. And Bobby, when we did this, and then the proof was in the pudding the next year. So we take a 200-acre field, and we plant these cover crops in that field in the fall before. Then in the spring, we cut the field in half, and we treat half of it our traditional way, the way we did the rest of the farm, and we treated the other half with no-till, and that was the only difference. We still used chemistry, and we still used fertility. We just took all the tillage out, okay? So we're already ahead of the game on cost just because of the tillage aspect is being taken out. But you know what? At the end of the year, that 100 acres that we did the no-till way was not only the best yielding cornfield in the farm, it was the best ROI. And that's what this is all about. It's not about yield. Our system is not about producing yield. It's about producing maximum return on your investment, just like any other business. I mean, farming is a business, so we have to treat it like a business. And Bobby, I want to maximize my dollars per acre, not be a yield hero and try to knock it out of the park every single year. That's not what we're about.
But you said you were that you were growing no-till radishes. I forget exactly what you called it. But
Tillage radish.
What is it called?
Tillage radish.
Tillage radish. So you got tillage radish on there, but then you rotate that with corn. Is that what you're saying?
Well, that's what we did. This was a bean stubble, a bean field. So we harvested the beans off early enough. We then came in and we planted 4 pounds to the acre of tillage radish with a no-till drill. And those radishes grew. They made their tubers. They sent a long root down into the profile. Then winter came, they died. And then you come in next spring and you're looking at just dead tillage plants laying on the surface. They're not going to hurt.
So you don't harvest the radishes.
No, the radish is used only in this case for a cover crop to mitigate compaction and sequester nutrients.
Okay, I get it. And so then what happened? Next year, you made all 200 acres.
In the spring, we split that 200 acres in half. So 100 of it was farmed like the rest of the farm. We came in, we did our spring tillage, we did all that. We got the ground prepped, and then we planted corn. On the other side, we just no-tilled with no pre-plant tillage. We just no-tilled in, and then we used our nitrogen program, and we used our chemical program. And at the end of the day, that fall, the 100 acres that was no-tilled was not only the best yielding, but it had the best return on investment because of the reduced cost of the tillage.
So then what happened after that?
Then I'm hooked. I can instantly see the benefit of what's happening here. So now I have to figure out, how do we move this wave of regenerative farming across the farm? How do we do it and not bankrupt the farm? Because we've got to get this across pretty quick, in my opinion. We got to get this across quick and start to see the benefits of regenerating the soil. But Bobby, I want to throw a little bit, we've got to slow down here a little bit. I went pretty fast. The number one thing we have to understand is a person out there cannot jeopardize the livelihood of their farm. They need to start slow, start with small acreage, make sure this is going to work in your operation, and then start to move it across the farm. But by 4 years, we were full-blown cover crops on every acre after 4 years. That's pretty quick.
You got lucky, or did you take a big loss?
No, we didn't take a big loss. I wouldn't say I got lucky.
You just advise other people not to do what you did, but you had found success.
It's hard to advise other people to be no, I don't want to use the word risky, but it was a calculated risk, okay? And I don't want to, it's hard for me to advise other farmers to be on the level of incline that I was on, because it's their farm that's at jeopardy, not mine. So I just want them to slow down a little bit. But Bobby, once you can see benefits of these cover crops after year one, I mean, you instantly start to see water infiltration pick up. You start to see earthworm counts go up. But another thing that we need to back up on is, I would also highly recommend that anybody wanting to do this, they need to baseline their farm. So what I mean is, they need to go out and they need to pull their soil samples. I would take sap analysis, which is a whole nother analysis. My good friend John Kempf is a master at sap analysis. But I would baseline the farm, meaning, let's say you're going to put 500 acres into this program. Then you need to draw a line in the sand and say, look, that 500 acres, the fertility levels are right here. Now, as we move forward, what's happening to our fertility? Is it going up? Is it going down? Is our yield going up? Is it going down? Then you can start to say to yourself, well, you know what? We've now pulled inputs down by 20%, but our yields still keep rising. So we're doing okay. So let's keep doing what we're doing. But if you don't do that baseline, you won't have any idea if what you're doing is right or wrong.
So, but you've gone farther than just tillage. You've actually cut back chemical use and fertilizer use, right?
Yeah, we've been on the journey for about 10 years. And after being in for 10 years, we were at 14-way cover crop mixes, meaning if you would go out in the fall and if you were planting a cocktail of a cover crop, we would have 14 different species in there. And what we're trying to develop here, Bobby, is what's called a quorum sensing. You're trying to get the combination of everything in the biological biome working together, because you don't know which one of those 14 species that you're going to put out there are going to hit and make it and go. There may be 7 of them that really take off and go, and the other 7 don't like the trigger environment that they're in. So you don't know that when you're planting. So you've got to maximize the amount of diversity you put in. So then when you do that, then we figured out we figured out how to use a roller crimper. Now, a roller crimper is a device it's a round barrel and it's got a chevron pattern on it. And when you get cover crops growing at a certain stage in their life, they are able to be rolled down with the roller crimper and terminated. So we started doing this with cereal rye. So now we are up to this point now, we are almost off of everything, okay? We're down to 70% reduction of inputs. Well, we started to roll cover crop before the soybeans, and we were now letting this mat. Now, just imagine cereal rye gets 6 feet tall. That's how tall I am, and it's over my head. And we lay this flat, okay? And then the beans go into it, and the beans grow out of it. And this mat that we just laid down is the armor on the soil. It's the thatch that's about 10 inches deep. There's nothing coming through that. There's no weeds. So we plant beans. The first year we did this, we planted 1,000 acres of beans.
That 10-inch mat on top of your soil. How deep do you plant the beans to make sure the weeds can't catch up with them?
Well, we're planting beans about 1.5 inches deep. So you have, when you pull into the field, now we do this 2 different ways. This is one way we do it. We roll first and come in after the roller. And now the planter is going to kind of press everything down. And we don't use any row cleaners to open up. So our double disc openers are cutting through that. We're going the same direction that the rye was rolled down, okay? So if the tractor went that way, that's how we're going this way with the planter, the same direction. And then we're going to plant the beans right into this. And then the beans are going to come up and grow. And there's not going to be any weed pressure for the first 45 or 60 days, if any. So what we did was we did 1,000 acres like this of soybeans. We left 100-acre field that we sprayed no chemistry on just to see if it would work. We did this for 2 years. That's when I said, how come we're not organic? And then the 3rd year, we stopped everything.
Well, but why? But what did you see on that 100 acres that you didn't spray?
We didn't see any weeds, or we didn't see enough weeds to be a problem that would mitigate yield or hurt yield. Too many times weeds are looked at as a bad thing. Weeds are not always bad. Weeds are telling you something out there. Certain weeds will tell you, you get a yellow weed that comes up in your field, you've got a sulfur problem. Let that weed play out, because that weed's there for a reason. That weed happens to be a good sequester of sulfur. Well, your profile is telling you need sulfur, so that yellow weed comes up and away it goes, does its thing, and you won't see it again. We've seen this many, many times. So one of the things that farmers are so tied up on is they can't drive down the road and see any weeds in their field, so they got to go get their sprayer and spray again to try to clean all the weeds up. I don't look at it that way. Now, if you have an explosion of weeds, that's not a good thing. But I'm talking about 5%, 10% of weeds is not going to hurt a thing.
What was your, and then are you now at this point, are you marketing yourself as regen, chemical free, organic? When does that start, and what are the economics of that?
Yeah, so we decided to go organic. I think it was 2017 or 18. I think it was 18. And when we went that route, we were then certified. I started with 500 acres, and it took us like 4 years to get, or 5 years to get the whole farm in, because again, I just come, from 08, I just jumped in head first on cover, something I've never seen before, cover crops. And we're now at a point where we can go organic, and we got to be a little more careful here, because there's no more easy buttons to push. Okay. There's no chemical buttons I can push. And we're also, Bobby, we're doing this with no tillage. I mean, this is what's so unheard of. There are a lot of organic farms out there that are certified organic, but they're mass tillage. I mean, it's mass destruction. They're tilling 10, 12, 14 times a year. We are doing this with no tillage. Because if you look at the principles of soil health, and this is where it all begins and ends, is with the principles of soil health. The first one is diversity. You've got to maximize the diversity of the cover crop package you're using and maximize your cash crop rotations. I mean, you mentioned in our bio that we've got 5 crops, we're up to 9 now. So we just keep moving for more and more and more diversity. And another one of them is minimizing disturbance. Now, what that means is not only tillage disturbance, but chemistry disturbance as well. So I mean, Bobby, we've got fields now on the farm that with the combination now of no chemicals and no tillage for 11 years now. And this is on large scale row crop. So we've got to keep in mind that we can do this. Now, I want to stress here though, I never pound the table and say, you better farm the way I never do that. What I want to tell you is, look, we are working on a system that has taken everything away, and I'm way over there. Over here is the group that is doing nothing. Let's meet somewhere in the middle and let's get started on regenerative practices of farming. And then we'll decide within your context, which by the way is another principle, where can we take your farm safely and not jeopardize the livelihood of your farm?
So I mean, nowadays, almost all the soy and corn that you get in this country is GMO. Are you using Roundup Ready corn, but just not using the Roundup?
No. We are now either buying certified organic seed, which would be all non-GMO, or what we're doing something else that's pretty cool, I think, on the farm. We're doing what's called epigenetics. If you want me to go into that, I can. It'll take me a few minutes to get into it.
I think that's really, I mean, to me, I'm fascinated by epigenetics.
Yeah.
The epigenetics are the impacts of exposures that actually amplify over generations. So
that's right.
There are certain chemicals, and Roundup is one of them, where you infect or you expose a mother rat, and her babies will show some impact, but their babies show a much greater impact. And
Right.
this is something that was, dismissed by science even, 15 years ago, but it's now mainstream science.
Yeah. So here's what, and I've got to give a precursor here, okay? You have to do this legally. There are rules and regulations that must be followed here. So here's what we did. And again, Bobby, when I'm sitting around thinking about the principles of soil health and being regenerative and being a good steward to the land and being conservation minded, I'm always thinking, I'm not inventing anything new here. I'm trying to remember everything that we've forgotten. I mean, think about how the homesteaders farmed. They took their 80-acre plot and they divided it into fourths, and they had a fourth of alfalfa, or a clover, they had a fourth of wheat, a fourth of beans, and a fourth of corn. And the clover, they baled 2 or 3 times a year. Guess what? That was the fuel for the horses. Then they plowed that under. Of course, we're not doing the tillage part, but then that became the nitrogen for their corn for the next year. I mean, they were already doing these things. So now I'm thinking about when I was a 14-year-old kid and I'm out on the farm and it's a beautiful fall day. It's about 75 degrees. There's not a cloud in the sky. The beans are ready. And Dad says, it's time to get the 2 wagons out of the barn. We're going to go get our seed beans for next year. This was in the late 70s, early 80s. Okay. No GMOs. There's no rules, no regulations. You were more than legal to harvest your own beans, put them in a bin, and use them again next year. And I said, Dad, what are you doing? Why would you do this when you can just go down the road? Son, we are letting our beans adapt to our system. That is epigenetics. So now I'm thinking the same thing. So we go to the USDA There's a building in Urbana, Illinois, and they house every seed known to man and woman. Bobby, every seed's in there. So you go to their catalog and you look for soybean genetics that are off patent. Okay, this is critical here. Please, anybody listening, you have to do this legally. So we bought 10 varieties of non-GMO beans that were off patent, $100 a piece. And they give you 50 seeds. So you have to grow these out by hand. The first wave is by hand. And then when we saw the first year's production off of those 10, we quickly cut it to 5. Okay. Now it took 4 years of growing these out to get to enough supply that we can now put it in our big John Deere planter and go out and plant a 40-acre field. Okay, so we've still kept these 5 separated this whole time. So now we've got the 5 planted out in the field that we've legally grown ourselves. And I decided on the day of harvest, I said, you know what? How do I know which variety my farm is going to adapt to? So I just said, we're going to make a land race. And we combined all 5 together. And then we went out the next spring, and that was our supply for the whole bean crop on our farm.
That's brilliant.
And we planted our beans out of our own supply. And not only that, Bobby, but it's a supply that is adapting to our system. And we're doing the same thing with cereal rye, and we're doing the same thing with livestock. We've got a cow herd and we've got a sheep herd. We do not introduce any outside genetics. It's all being done within the herd. All of the sires are being picked from inside the herd.
And then where do you market, and do you get a premium for selling organic, et cetera?
Yeah, we get a premium for selling organic, it's typically been fairly high over the conventional corn and soybean guys, but there's been a lot of supply coming in from overseas that has flooded our market, and our prices are extremely depressed right now. So hopefully there's something.
Organics coming over from overseas?
From India. A lot of organic comes in from India, and it oversupplies our demand. And then you know what happens there, the prices go down. A year and a half ago, Bobby, there was a bid out there for organic beans at $40 a bushel, and today it's 19. So it's been cut in half in 18 months. So there's a lot of rules and regs that need to be looked at. Now, they are trying to help. There are some new rules that have come in on the organic side, and they are trying to maintain the integrity here a little bit better. So it is happening. It just, things like that are hard. That's hard. And I'm going to go ahead and announce something here right now on your podcast. We are also Regenified certified, which is a stamp of approval from a company that is out measuring your regenerative practices. And it's a 5-tier system, and we came in at tier 4, which I'm very proud of. So being organic, being no-till, coming in at tier 4 is amazing. So I'm very proud of that.
And who, when you say somebody put out a bid for $40 soybeans, who is that? Is that like Whole Foods or something?
That was a processor that was looking for food grade soybeans to put into food that we would eat as a consumer.
And does the Indian market respond to that bid as well? I mean, are they going to change practice? Are they going to change their crops over there, or is that just on the market already?
Well, that probably has already been. I mean, those are slow boats coming across. Those crops already had to have been figured out a year in advance. Their timing was good, but I think that flow is coming all the time, Bobby. I don't think it was just a spike in supply because the price ran up. I think there were other, and I'm not a great one to discuss about this because I don't spend a lot of time on this because I've got so many other things to worry about. but I think it was one of those perfect storm situations where there was a lot of supply coming when the price was high, and then they just slammed us with bushels, and then the price just quickly tailed off.
You know, I've heard smaller farmers. You have like 10 sections, right? You have 7,000 acres.
Yeah.
That's about 10 square miles, right? A farm. But I've heard that from smaller farmers, you know, who might have a section or a half a section, that it's much more difficult for them to do no-till and organic for that matter. It's more difficult than for the bigger operations.
Possibly, but I think, you know, I think the next big push in the regenerative movement is education. We've got, it's simply, I think, Bobby, if you were to go on to that 500 acre producer's farm, and if you were to able to implement a program with him, sit down and understand what his risk level is, understand where his context is, and figure out and come up with a game plan for him to get started. And remember, I said we cannot jeopardize the farm. And it's my opinion that the first time anybody ever tries anything new, it better work, because if it doesn't, they're not coming back. So with all that being said, we've got to get the teachers out there to get this layer of support to help these farmers to get comfortable to move into these regenerative practices. Most of the time, Bobby, it's just a simple fact is they don't know what to do. They hear these podcasts like this, they go to conferences, but they still don't understand, how do I come home and implement a program? And that's what we've got to figure out how to do, is get this teaching layer.
But you help young farmers or farmers who are trying to get into it, right?
Oh yeah. I travel the world. I mean, I'm probably on the road now more than I am farming. I mean, I am stretched pretty thin. I'm going to Argentina in a couple of weeks. I was in Estonia earlier this year. I'll be in South Africa. I mean, it's just on and on and on. And I'm okay with that. This teaching is what's driving this and what's moving this. I mean, Bobby, when I get a text message from somebody on the other side of the planet that says, thank you very much. I went and saw you speak somewhere. I went home and implemented what you said. I wish I would have done this 10 years ago. Thank you. That makes my week, you know, and that's what it's all about.
And so, you know, what have the economics been for you?
How have the economics been? Yeah, economics are good. I mean, there's a point in the middle when you do the transition from doing nothing to starting these regenerative practices. There may be a little bit of yield drag there, a little bit, but not enough to make it worrisome. But Bobby, when you then go into organic with no tillage, we really dropped on the yield. But you have to understand, right now on our farm, we are saving close to $2.7 million a year on expenses, because we're not buying fertilizer. We're not buying chemistry. We're not buying any more seed. And you know, we're raising all of our own beans. Now, I know there's opportunity costs for those beans to be sold, and we're losing out on that. I get that. But these beans are adapting to our system. We're using them. So when you start to add all of the input costs up and the savings that we are, it's unbelievable. And most of our fields will be running in that 20% return on investment, but we do have some fields that are at 100%. But those are situations that are special. Maybe they've been alfalfa they're going into their second year. There's no expense on that. There's a little bit of fertility we need to get back. And the alfalfa fields are the only fields in the farm that we do use some livestock manure on, because once you remove that crop 4 or 5 times a year, that's total removal, and that's hard on the soil. So we augment that with livestock manure, but those are the only fields.
Just so people can understand who aren't, farmers, how much, what are your revenues per acre, and your cost for versus, profit for per acre, just generally speaking, what do you want? How much does a farmer want that's going to make them happy per acre?
Now, you want me to answer that in my way and the neighbors? You want me to answer two ways?
Both of them.
Okay. All right. Again, our system is not about yield. Now, I understand you have to make yield to pay the bills. I understand that, but that's not what's driving. I'm going to answer your question, but let me make myself a note here. Human health. I want to come back to that. Okay. We're going to come back to human health. So what I like to do is I want to be in a margin area where we are starting with a gross of somewhere between $1,200 and $1,600 an acre gross. Okay, so whatever that crop is, if it's $10 a bushel corn at 140 bushel an acre, that's $1,400 an acre gross. Okay, that's a starting point where I'd like to start from. Now, let's go to the other side let's go to the expense side. And we've got spreadsheets, we've got flow charts, we got all this stuff going on. So we know where our costs are, okay? And when you add everything in, cash rent, mortgage payments, living expenses, you add everything in down to this pin right here, and then you look at the two, I would love to be in that $500 an acre profit area. 500 to 700. So we're coming from $1,400 down to 700. So that $700 of expenses, Bobby, is everything. Cash rent, mortgage, everything.
Okay.
The neighbors, let's put the neighbors into perspective. The neighbors right now have got roughly a cost of $900 an acre to put out an acre of corn. Almost $900. So, and let's just assume for easy math that and I'm going to go to my calculator here, so I apologize. I'm going to tip my head a little bit. So 900 plus, let's say cash rent is $320 an acre. I don't know. Let's just use that number. That seems like a pretty good number. That's $1,220. And right now, December corn is trading around 470 something. It's in that 470 area. And let's assume that they're getting a 40-cent basis at the elevator. So that takes your corn down to 440. So let's divide the 1220 by $4.40. They'd have to average 277 bushels to break even. That's not possible. That is not possible. I'm trying to work on a $500 an acre margin profit. They've got to maintain 277 bushel an acre to break even.
So what's happening to them? I mean, are they coming over to your, knocking on your door and saying?
Sometimes, like I told you earlier in the podcast, I never pound this down anybody's throat, including my neighbors. Okay, my neighbors know who I am. We all get along. They know how I'm farming. I am always looking for validations, whatever that may be, okay? You walk out into a field of ours and it is so loud out there because the bugs and the birds and everything's chirping and I mean, it is literally that loud out in the middle of our field. That's a validation that you are growing a beautiful ecosystem, okay? Another validation is when I get a phone call from one of my neighbors who farms very, very, very large, more than 40,000 acres, okay? And they're a conventional farmer, full tillage, full chemistry, full everything. They call me up and say, can we please have a meeting and we need to talk about cover crops? I say, you bet. So we have the meeting. I go into their office, we sit down and we're small talking and I say, okay, guys, why am I here today? This is the answer they gave me. We know there's change coming. We see it. We understand that cover crops and no-till are going to be a factor of farming in the future. We need you to teach us how to do it. Perfect. That's all we need. Because honestly, Bobby, where I'm located, the neighbors are going to watch that guy more than they're going to watch me. So if that guy there starts implementing cover crops and no-till, they're all going to start saying, maybe we better start getting involved. And lo and behold, as I drive around the community, I'm starting to see fields slowly popping up that are green with cover crops. So sometimes things happen, as you know, because of attrition. So maybe, sometimes pounding on the table and browbeating does not work. We need to show them how you do this and explain to them how you do this.
David, anything else I should ask?
Where can they find him?
Oh, yeah.
And does he have any hope for the future, I guess, too, maybe?
Yeah. What do you think? I mean, are you optimistic about the future, about us making this transition as a nation to this kind of, sustainable agriculture?
Yes, but I think what you need to understand here, Bobby, is we need to understand, what does success look like? Okay? Do you honestly think we could get 100% of the farmers to farm this way? No way. You know it's not going to happen. So you have to understand that. So now you have to say to yourself, okay, you know what? When I'm president of the United States, I think, to me, a solution that looks positive would be a 40% movement into regenerative. Think about that. Just think about, I'm just going to use rough numbers here for my math in my head. It's not quite 200 million, but there's 180 million acres of corn and soybeans grown in the United States, plus or minus a few acres, okay? 40% of that is what? 72 million acres? Think about that. If we were to get 72 million acres farming in regenerative conservation practices, we would change the planet. Then everyone looks to the United States as the powerhouse, because we are. So if the United States can do this, why can't China do this? Why can't India do this? Why can't South America do this? Or whatever the case may be. So yes, I am very hopeful that this will happen in the future. And honestly, I think we need, the government subsidies need to put a little more teeth into the payout process. And this is what I mean by that. I think you should set up a 5-tier level. Hey, if you don't want to implement any regenerative practices, fine, then you don't get any government subsidy. But if you want to do 20% of implementation, we'll give you 20% of the payment. So on, so on, and so on, to where if you got to a level 5, you could get all of the government subsidy payments if you gave us something in return. And by the way, I am heading into year 6 now of 0 government subsidies. None. Haven't had any government multi-peril insurance. We're not in ARC or PLC. There is no government subsidy multi-peril crop insurance. We don't do any of that. And we're doing this to scale. And I'm telling you, this can be done. You need to change the mindset. And that's another thing, Bobby. We've got to understand, this is heritage. I mean, you step onto a farm, and if you start to offend them of the way they're going to politely ask you to leave and never come back. So we cannot offend them. We have to show them that there maybe is another way of farming to add to their current system.
You mentioned human health.
Yeah, I want to go there. As everybody today wants to talk about regenerative farming and increasing human health. Okay, I get it. I'm totally on board. But what they're talking about is taking a food that has lost its nutrient density over the years and regaining that nutrient density through these farming practices. I totally agree with that. I mean, my gosh, Bobby, we've lost over a third of our nutrient density in the last 20 years. Over a third. You'd have to eat, I think it was 8 oranges today to equal 1 orange from 50 years ago on nutrient density. Why? Why is that happening? Okay, that's one side of the human health. The other side of the human health equation is our health, us being around these chemicals and these caustic herbicides and pesticides and all of these things, insecticides. I can remember as a kid being 14 years old on the bus, coming home from school and couldn't wait to get home and help dad because he's planting corn today. And I'm out there in the middle of insecticide boxes and all this caustic stuff. And on the side of that insecticide box is a skull and crossbones. And I'm like, Dad, what's this? He said, son, that's death. I'm like, well, why are we touching this stuff? So then now I'm older and I'm think about different things. You know, once you go on the other side of life, you know, we're both on the back end of life now. I'm 60. I turned 60 in January, and we look at things differently now. And I'm sitting here thinking, let's see now. My wife had breast cancer when she was 30. My son-in-law or my nephew had non-Hodgkin's lymphoma when he was 23. My uncle died of cancer. My sister-in-law died of cancer. My mother had diabetes. I've got diabetes. What's going on? So then you start to think to yourself, okay, I am done. I don't care if our farm loses 40% yield. I don't care. I am no longer going to expose our family members or our team members to these caustic chemicals, period. So that's where we are, Bobby. And once you start to think like this, I mean, you probably can think back through your family tree and some of the health issues coming through time. It's there. I mean, look at autoimmune diseases are skyrocketing. Everything seems to be a problem right now.
Yeah, and farm communities are now some of the sickest communities in our country.
Yeah, yeah. So I can't say enough about the way we farm. Is it going to feed the world? Is our system going to feed the world today? No, it's not. I'll be honest with you. It's not. I am doing too many radical things that is not generating the yield that we need, but we are generating nutrient density to where that if you only have a small portion of food to supply to a third world country, it now is at least higher nutrient density. So that small portion goes further in their lifestyle. Now, we will be there. I think we'll be there before I retire. I think I'm 60. I've probably got 12 good years in me of being in charge here. I mean, of coming up with the ideas. We can do a lot in 12 years. No doubt about it. And the next frontier on this whole thing is biology. And it has already started, and we need a systematic biology program running side by side our systematic principles of soil health, building your farm into the future.
Rick Clark, thank you very much. Tell us how people can reach you.
Yeah, this again, I appreciate being on here. Thank you. I am online. I'm known as Farm Green 13. So that's Farm Green, the number 13. Our webpage is www.farmgreen.land. I put my email out there, and I'll even give you my cell phone number because I publish it everywhere because I think teaching is critical. Email is rick@farmgreen.land. Cell phone 765-585-2413. Bobby, thank you so much. And what I really appreciate and respect is the fact that you understand how important this is and you've taken time. I mean, you're in the middle of a presidential race here having a podcast with me. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Well, a lot of my presidential race is about restoring health, restoring soils, which are it's the foundation stone of our country. Let me ask you just a personal question. Do you have any opinions about raw milk?
I think raw milk is just fine to drink if you understand the source where it's coming from. I have drank it in the past. I have drank it in the past, and honestly, because of my diabetes, it kind of raises my sugar. But if I wasn't diabetic, I would be drinking raw milk. Yes.
Rick, thank you very much. God bless you, and I'm going to come back and do your podcast in a couple of weeks.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much.
You too. Thanks.
Thank you so much, everyone. And Mr. Kennedy, I want to start by acknowledging you for whatever it took for you to get here. I know it wasn't easy, and the fact that you're here sends such a powerful message to our Latino community that you're a stand for us, about your commitment to us, and that you care about us, otherwise you wouldn't be here. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, and thank you everybody for being here.
So we're going to start with a fun fact. Muchas personas no saben que habla perfecto español y quiero que la primera parte va a ser en español y que nos cuentes acerca de tu experiencia viviendo en Colombia. Atrás de cámaras conversamos que también viviste en Perú. Cuéntanos cómo esas experiencias te han conectado con la comunidad latina acerca de nuestra situación financiera.
Sí, cuando yo estaba joven, cuando yo tuve 14 años, cada verano después trabajé en una finca en los llanos en Colombia, cerca de la ciudad de Villavicencio y adentro del río Meta. Y estaba una finca de 10,000 hectáreas con un ganadería con vacas y cuidando vacas y caballos y todas las cosas del campo. Y entonces, en 1973, viví en Perú, en el altiplano, en un pueblo pequeño se llama Ilave, con los indios aymaras. Y también en el año 2001, yo estaba para el verano en una cárcel, prison, en Puerto Rico, porque Maximum Seguridad, una cárcel se llama Guaynabo, porque yo estaba trabajando para arreglar la Armada de los Estados Unidos. Estaba bombardero Vieques y yo estaba trabajando in forcing the Navy to leave Vieques. I brought the law. Yo estaba abogado para los grupos de Puerto Rico y el juez put me in jail for the summer. So in esos tiempos pude practicar mi español.
Wow, qué interesante lugar donde practicar español.
Pero he olvidado mucho y tengo que practicarlo otra vez. Pero en cárcel no.
Excelente. Entonces, we're going to switch to English. Mr. Kennedy, you have emphasized the importance of education throughout your campaign, and I would like to know, how do you see financial literacy fitting into that traditional educational model?
I'll tell you just an example from my own life. My father was Attorney General of the United States. He was the campaign manager for his brother. My father was Robert Kennedy. He was the Attorney General for his brother,
John Kennedy when my uncle was president. My uncle was killed in 1963. And in 1964, my father ran for Senate in New York. And he was elected senator. And then 2 years later, and as most of you know, in 1968, he then ran for president, and he was assassinated during that run. I was with him when he died in Los Angeles. 2 years earlier, he had walked through a neighborhood, the poorest neighborhood in New York City. It was called Bedford-Stuyvesant. And he had walked through that neighborhood, and he made a decision to devote a large part of the energy for the rest of his life to figuring out ways to bring financial literacy and capital into that neighborhood. The neighborhood was very, very poor, but there was a very strong spirit and an entrepreneurial spirit. But there were two things that were what people lacked. One was there was no access to capital. This is because even by then, there was only about 30 minority-owned banks in our country. And they were underfunded and undercapitalized. The Fed would not give them money. And so the availability of home improvement loans, of home loans, so you could go borrow money and buy a home, it wasn't available in those communities. So many of the people were living in absentee houses. And if you don't own a home, you have no access to capital. If you own a home, you can borrow money. But in these communities, they couldn't get mortgages. And the communities were redlined by the bank, so they wouldn't make loans in them. And if you don't have access to capital, you're going to see high crime in those communities, and that's what happened. Well, my father went to the communities and said, we're going to figure out how to make the banks loan money and to get capital flows back into this community. But you also know one of the things they said to him is, the people said to him is, you know, we have a strong entrepreneurial spirit, but we don't really know how to run a business. We don't know how to do, you know, inventories and accounting and taxes and all of the things that you need to know if you're going to run a business. So my father got some of the leaders of Wall Street to commit 1 day a week or 1 day a month to come to Bedford-Stuyvesant and meet with aspiring business people. He got Tom Watson, who was the CEO of IBM at that time. He got Andre Mayer, who was the CEO of Lazard Frères, and many, many other businesses, and they agreed to donate their time to come and coach business people. Now, when my father died, I took his place on the board of Bedford-Stuyvesant Restoration. And the first time I went there was in 1966 with my dad, and all of the stores were boarded up. There was no commerce. The nearest grocery store was 75 blocks. And today, if you go to Bed-Stuy, it is booming. There's commerce that is flowing out onto the streets. There's a grocery store, a Pathmark grocery store in the neighborhood. And there's lots of opportunities and lots of role models of Black and Hispanic businessmen who are doing very well and who have roots in that community and who are financing the little leagues, who are buying hockey uniforms and football uniforms for the kids, who are giving jobs to people, to children when they work in the summer, and all the things that happen when you have business within your community. And they now are able to pass that financial literacy and that business, that accrued business knowledge. My father recognized he was never in business, but his father was in business, and he went to Harvard. So he knew many people who were in business, and if he wanted to start a business, it would be a simple thing. He'd pick up the phone and ask questions of his friends. But if you lived in that community, you didn't have access to that kind of knowledge. And my father, one of the important things that my father did in restoring that community, and what we did, what I worked on for 40 years, is to make sure there was financial literacy in that community. And the outcome of that has been extraordinary. The business is booming today in Bed-Stuy, and it's become the anchor, the financial anchor for all of Brooklyn.
I love that. That's so powerful and so true. And that's part of what we do here in our mission, to educate and empower the Latino community so that they learn and they get into business and finance. So let's switch to inflation. Inflation has affected many Americans tremendously, especially in the last few years. If you were elected president today, what is your plan to address that?
Inflation is a product of printing money, and inflation is actually a tax on the poor. It's a way of devaluating your bank account, devaluating your salary, devaluating your fixed income, and that money is shifted upward to the super rich. And we saw during COVID, when President Trump and President Biden locked down our country for 500 days, they not only bankrupted the middle class in this country, 41% of black-owned businesses will never reopen. They closed 3.3 million businesses. They left open the big businesses. They left open Walmart. They left open Amazon. But the small businesses that enrich our community, that are the basis of the American experience, American democracy, were all locked down. 41% of black-owned businesses will never reopen, and many of these had 3 generations of equity in them. But not only did it hurt the middle class, but it enriched the super rich. So there was a shift in wealth, the largest in American history, of $4 trillion during that 500-day lockdown, President Trump and President Biden, upward to a new oligarchy of billionaires. We created, in 500 days, we created 500 new billionaires, a billionaire every day. And the money came directly from the American middle class. And in order to sustain that, we had to print money because nobody was working, nobody was paying taxes, and all of these new costs were imposed on the government. So President Trump, during his short 4 years, President Trump, when he came into office, promised that he was going to run America like a business. He said he was going to balance the budget. Instead, he ran up the biggest debt in the history of our country. He spent $8 trillion in 4 years. He spent more money in those 4 years than every president combined from George Washington to George W. Bush. 283 years of history. President Biden, in his 3.5 years, is rushing to catch up with him. President Biden is adding to the debt $1 trillion every 90 days. Our national debt is now $34 trillion. We spend more just servicing that debt, paying the interest on that debt, than our entire military budget. Within 5 years, every dollar that we collect in taxes is going to go to service. 50 cents out of every dollar we spend in taxes is going to go to servicing the debt. In 10 years, 100% of every dollar that we collect in taxes will go to the debt. It's not sustainable. And the way that we're paying for that is through inflation, which is just a way of taxing the poor. One of the largest costs is war. War requires us to print money. And in fact, fiat currency, which is paper currency, was invented precisely to finance wars. If we didn't have paper currency, if we just had gold or silver, we wouldn't have wars because nobody would put up with, the politicians would have to come to us first and say, I'm going to do a war in Iraq against Saddam Hussein, who never did anything bad to the United States. And we're going to spend $4 trillion on that war, and you're not going to be able to send your kids to school, and you're not going to be able to pay for your retirement. Do you want to do this? And we'd all say, no, we don't want to do it. But they don't have to do that. They can just make the war without even getting Congress to approve. And then afterward, they print the money. And we've spent $8 trillion on these forever wars over the past 20 years, every one of them, the country we had the war in, is worse off than we found it. We have fewer friends today. Around the world, Americans are less safe. The middle class is hollowed out. We're paying for those wars with inflation. And the only way we put an end to this, to inflation, ultimately over the long term, is if we end the war machine. We have to wind down the war machine. That's what I'm going to do as president. We have 800 bases around the world. China has 1. Russia has 1.5. All of those bases are in countries that are waiting to start a new war, to continue this pipeline, which helps the military-industrial complex. It helps the big bankers. It helps, the pharmaceutical industry and some financial interests. They're all disastrous for the American people. So we need to get our hands on the cost. We need to reduce the cost of government. We need to start doing that by cutting the military budget in half. And we can protect our country with half that. That's what Eisenhower's budget was during the height of the Cold War. And we need to also wind down the chronic disease epidemic, because that's the biggest cost. That's costing us $4.3 trillion a year. And that's 5 times the military budget. And we have the highest healthcare costs of any country in the world. Businesses are paying $2,000 a month per person for healthcare. It's bankrupting small businesses in this country. And we have the sickest population in the world. Nobody has a chronic disease like we do. When I was a boy, 6% of Americans had chronic disease. Today, 60% do. And today, for example, diabetes, which affects Hispanic communities more than any other, Hispanic and American Indians. When I was a kid, a typical pediatrician would see 1 case of diabetes in his entire career. 50-year career, 1 case. Today, a typical pediatrician, 1 out of every 3 kids who walks through his office door is pre-diabetic or diabetic. And it's costing us, diabetes alone, the mitochondrial dysfunction is costing more than our military budget. No other country in the world has anything like this. We have more chronic disease here, and it is bankrupting our country, destroying our morale. It's hurting particularly people in poor communities, communities of color, Latino Americans. And I'm going to fix that. I know how to fix it. I'm happy to talk about exactly what I'm going to do to fix it, and I'm going to fix it quickly. We need to drop these expenditures. It's the only way, ultimately, that we can get our hands on the problem of inflation.
Very powerful. I think we've all realized how crucial it is to reduce spending that is taking us nowhere good. So we would love to know, what legacy do you hope to leave behind? How do you want to be remembered? I know you supported cryptocurrencies, support investment, education. How exactly would you like to be remembered?
Would I like to be remembered?
Yes, what legacy we
You
like
mean a political legacy?
Yeah, in general.
I think we've seen the deterioration of a loss of hope in our country. In 2013, there was a poll taken of Americans, I think it was Gallup, of young Americans under 35 years old. And they were asked, are you proud of the United States of America? And 85% said yes. The same poll taken 5 months ago, only 18% said yes. So somehow in the administrations of the last 2 presidents, an entire generation of Americans has lost their pride in our country, and they've lost their faith in their own futures. We have a generation of kids who are not going to get into homes, who will never buy a home. The central promise of the American dream when I was a kid was that if you worked hard, if you played by the rules, that you could buy a home, you could finance a home, you could take a summer vacation, you could raise your family, and you could put something aside for retirement on one job. There's nobody in this upcoming generation who believes that that promise applies to them. I have 7 children. One of them is 39, and he has a house. The younger 6 siblings, they all went to the best schools in our country. They have great jobs, they have great friendships, and none of them believes that they're going to be able to afford a home. When I was their age, I was looking to buy a home already. But none of them believes that they are going to be able to get in a home. The price of housing in this country has doubled over the past year. It's gone from about 200,000 to over 400,000, and the interest rates have gone up, have also doubled. And that means that home is costing you 4 or 5 times what it was a year and a half ago. And there are many reasons for that, but one of the main reasons is you have these giant companies, BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, Fidelity, that those 3 companies own 88% of the S&P 500. They own our economy. And now they're trying to buy all of our land and all of our single-family homes. Last year, almost 30% of new homes purchases were investment houses, and individuals can't buy them anymore. And probably a lot of you have had the experience of knowing somebody who's about to buy a home, and at the last minute, somebody else comes in with a cash offer 20% over the asking price and snatches it off the market. And if you ask, who was this person who just took my home? It turns out to be an LLC with an ambiguous name. And if you pull the strings and follow, who is this really? It leads you to BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, Fidelity, these big companies that are now owning us. And we're turning from an ownership society into a rental society. And when we do that, we go from being the citizens to being the subjects. Home ownership is so important. It's important because if you own a home, you care about your community. You care about your police, your firefighters, your teachers. You go to the PTA meetings. You go to, you care about your neighbors. You care about the appearance of your home. And it roots us in communities. But more importantly, you have access to capital. Because if you own a home, you can take a second mortgage, and then if you do have an entrepreneurial impulse, you can borrow that money, you can bet your home on it, and you can build a yoga studio or a sporting goods store or a bar or a bowling alley or whatever it is, or a restaurant. And this is traditionally what Hispanic Americans have done. They start a small bodega or a little restaurant, and it's the gateway, and they build themselves a future. Well, if you don't own capital, you don't own equity, you will not have access to capital. And that's what's happening to our country now, where the capital and equity is being stripped from the American middle class and sent upward. And it's being stripped by a series of mechanisms that are deliberate and systematic, that are pumping wealth upward to create a new oligarchy. And I visited every nation in Latin America during my lifetime. And when I was young, all of these countries were tremendously unstable. Why were they politically unstable? Because they had terrible economic stratification. They had poor people at the bottom, and then they had widespread poverty at the bottom, and they had a rich, wealthy oligarchs above. And U.S. foreign policy was to look at the poor people as potentially communists and put all the money into keeping these military juntas and dictators in place and keeping the oligarchy at the top. And there's a wonderful Peruvian economist whose name is Hernando de Soto. And he said, he looked at, you look at this configuration of stratified configuration. If you have rich people above and a lot of poor people below, it can't support democracy for very long. On countries like Bolivia, where it was really extreme, you'd have 100 coups d'etats in 120 years. And it can't support democracy because the job of one political party is to protect the prerogatives and the privilege of the rich. And they have to, nobody's going to vote to make the rich richer. So in order to get the vote, they have to lie to people, they have to fix elections, they have to deceive, they have to intimidate people, and you start getting a very violent society. And people below feel like they're being robbed, which they are. And so it gets more and more violent. And Hernando de Soto said the cure for that, and the reason for that in Latin America is because it's very, very hard to get land title in Latin America. There's laws that make the title very uncertain. And most countries, you can own land, but you cannot get title that you can go borrow money on. And what he said is the solution to poverty in Latin America is to make it easier for people to get title to their land. So I believe that. I believe both foreign policy and our domestic policy should be rooted in trying to get people land ownership and trying to build the middle class. When my uncle went in 1962, he went to Colombia, and he was there with Yves Camargo. And Colombia had just come out of a time called La Violencia. 200,000 Colombians had died in violence of the kind that for exactly the reason I talked about. It was a rich class and a poor class, and they were at war with each other. 200,000 people died, and Yves Camargo came in. My uncle traveled a lot of times when he was President. Kennedy traveled many, many times abroad when he was president. But he said that the statesman, and he had met the smartest people in the world. He'd met Charles de Gaulle in France. He met Eamon de Valera, who was the George Washington of Ireland, who he loved. But of all the state leaders that they met, the one they admired most, him and his wife, Jackie Kennedy, was Yves Camargo in Colombia. They thought he was the smartest, the most visionary leader that they had met. And there were 2 million people in the Central Plaza in Bogota who came to greet my uncle. And Yves Camargo said, "Do you know why they love you?" And my uncle said, "Why?" And he said, "Because they think you put America on the side of the poor." My uncle made a resolution when he came into president. He was asked by his best friend, Ben Bradley, "What do you want on your gravestone?" And he told Ben Bradley, he kept the peace. He said the primary job of a president of the United States is to keep the country out of war. He said he didn't want children in Latin America and Africa, when they heard United States of America, to think of a man with a gun. He wanted them to think of a Peace Corps volunteer. He wanted them to think of the Alliance for Progress, of USAID, which he created those programs to rebuild the middle class. And today, and he kept our country out of war. He kept it out of Laos. He kept it out of, he never sent a combat troop to Vietnam. He kept it out of Germany. He kept it out of Cuba. And today, there are more statues to John Kennedy in Africa, Asia, and Latin America than any other president, more boulevards named after him, more neighborhoods, universities, colleges than any other president, probably more than all the US presidents combined, because people wanted America to be on this side of the war, but be on the side of the poor and to be on the side of peace. And I want to restore that moral authority to our country. I want to restore that real leadership to our country, the effective leadership, the respect that people had one time for our country around the world. And in this country, we need to start by restoring the middle class, and that means getting every American into a home.
Absolutely. We need a strong middle class, because one of the major issues in Latin America is that there's really no middle class. You're either doing really well or you are very poor. And I think the wonderful thing, and the main reason why we come to America as immigrants, is because there's a strong middle class and we all have a shot to have a decent life. So, Mr. Kennedy, I want to thank you so much for coming here, for your valuable time. And I just wanted to say that it's very inspiring to see such an influential leader like you come here, play full out, do whatever it takes to support our community with your message. It really speaks volumes, and we're very much grateful. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Simply